All right. Well, look, first of all, a warm welcome, Tim. This is your debut as a guest speaker to Dealey Plaza
Thank you.
UK, and very pleased that you are here, and obviously delighted that you've recovered from the illness that you had last month. For those of you that don't know, who weren't at Ashorne Hill in Warwickshire for our 30th, Tim was unwell on the day that he was due to present. But of course, the upside, Tim, is that we've got more time for you to, to expand on your research and, elaborate on your views, which is great. These are open-ended. I will warn you that the longest, that's a bad expression. The longest event, I think, was about 4 to 4.5 hours. Nancy's certainly been responsible for that. I think Brooks has as well. But I suspect that it'll be around the 2 to 3 hour mark. That's kind of what you should work at. But it's not set in stone. It just gives you time to, to develop any arguments that you've got. Just for the benefit of other people, I first heard you, Tim, on a podcast a couple of years ago. In fact, when you'd written your book, so I guess it was all around promoting the new research that had come out. And it actually prompted me to buy your book, which is this one here, which is Hidden in Plain Sight, which I would recommend to people. It's a cracking read. You've got to work at it. It's 550 pages. It's not something you can just skip through. But essentially, it focuses on the witnesses who appeared publicly before the HSCA, and it's in the chronological order in which they appeared. There are some big revelations which we'll dig deeper into, because some of the opinions you've got are not necessarily mainstream JFK assassination law, and we'll talk about that in much more depth later. But just to give members a snippet of some of the little nuggets that I came across. And they may be out there. I don't know, but they were certainly news to me. First of which was when Sorrells and Curry were doing the reconnaissance for the motorcade. I was surprised that they actually stopped the run through at the corner of Elm and Houston, which, bearing in mind what happened subsequently, is somewhat shocking. The suggestion that, well, we're done now, and then he's just going to go downhill, take the Stemmons ramp and go off to Parkland, and let's go back to, HQ. It's a very odd thing. I hadn't heard that before. And at best, it's negligence. At worst, it's nefarious. So that's an example of a little nugget. The other thing I thought that was kind of interesting was, and I'd never given this any thought before, but the fact that, given the fact that this was an enormous event that Dallas was staging, that the SS agents really didn't have to go out to, feed and drink themselves. They could have quite easily have had room service in the Fort Worth Hotel. I mean, it could have been all part of the pre-planning and organisation. And I think that's a really strong point, actually, because they've opened themselves up to terrible publicity and negligence and so forth, and that's the best case scenario. That is another kind of little nugget that I think, well, that's kind of interesting. It is so bloody obvious, that they could have done something given the significance of the event. Another thing that struck me was the brutal death that Earl Warren's father had, being bludgeoned to death. And again, I had no idea that was part of the history here. And I think you make a very salient point that that might be behind why he was so reticent to publish or bring the sort of, pretty graphic medical evidence to other commissioners' attention and indeed the public. And also on a sort of humorous note, there is quite a bit of humour in the book. And I liked. I mean, we'll talk about the Witt testimony. I'm absolutely sure the circus of that, but.
Yeah.
The quip that you make that the guy had more umbrellas than the penguin, I found particularly amusing. So certainly the book comes with my recommendation for what that's worth. What we like to do with all of our guests is to ask them how they got into this saga, and I think particularly in your case, which researchers you got close to. I mean, you specifically make a splash in the book about the fact that you wanted to contact and touch base with the leading experts in their field. But it'd be interesting to know that, what was the trigger point, and were you involved with any of the pioneers, any of the 1.0 or 2.0 researchers? And also, I think if you could highlight in this section the witnesses that you got to interview. You mentioned Aubrey Pike, you mentioned Marina, of course, and Blakey, who you interviewed in 1998. So if you could also touch on the particular witnesses that you've found very interesting over the decades that you've been doing this.
Right.
And then I think to wrap that all up in this first bit, what led you to focus on the HSCA?
Sure. Right. The whole thing came about. I was finishing my master's degree, and I could not come up with a topic. And finally, I thought, well, why don't I put some kind of a guide together dealing with the HSCA? And I thought, well, I can't put a guide together on all the witnesses. That would be encyclopedics. But I thought, well, maybe I can put something together on the witnesses who actually gave public testimony. Well, now we have reduced it to 52. And I thought, well, that's manageable. I'll do that. So what I'll do is I'll go into their testimony, lift out the salient points, and make a few highlights, maybe some analysis, and that will be it. And it was about 125 pages long. So obviously, the book is a massive expansion of the original, to be sure. And then, of course, I had to present my findings before a committee to get my master's degree, and that was laughable at best. I mean, I literally could have fallen asleep and passed the oral examinations. The 4 people interviewing me together had read one book on the Kennedy assassination, and that was Posner's Case Closed. That was it. That's all they had. So I'm thinking, okay, this I could sleepwalk through this, for goodness sakes. And they didn't lift up any objections or anything. It was almost embarrassing, to be honest with you. So, okay, game over. Got my master's degree. I went on, I guess. But yeah, that's how the whole thing started. And eventually, if I got in my car right now, I could be at Notre Dame, where Blakey used to teach, in about 35 minutes. So I contacted him to see if he would give me an interview. I think this is back in '98, if I'm not mistaken. And he was sure, let's talk. So I drove down to Notre Dame and went into his office, which is a massively huge office. He just threw his feet up on the desk and said, let's talk. So he was quite open about everything, and thought, okay, let's talk. So I was there for a few hours. He was charming, kind, respectful, held his ground when we squared off a few times. But all in all, it was that was the first thing I ever got published. I published the interview, I think, in Walt Brown's Deep Politics Quarterly back in '98. I guess it was. But the interview was quite interesting, especially the revelations that he kind of admitted to. He thought that Jack White was a massive mistake to have him testify, because he said at the end of the day, really the only thing they did was make fun of him. And I said, yeah, that's exactly what happened. The biggest blunder, he thought, was not putting Bill and Gail Newman to give public testimony. He thought that was a mistake. If he had to do it over again, he said, I definitely would have put them before the committee. But that was all spilled milk at that point. He was just telling me what he wished he wouldn't have done, and then he told me what he wished he would have done. And there was a couple more examples, but that day I remember vividly, he was locked and loaded. He thought the key was to connect Oswald to Ruby, not because he thought they knew each other, because I don't think that he did. But at the end of the day, even though the HSCA said there was a probable conspiracy, he still thought Oswald did it. He thought the single bullet theory was true. He thought there was a shot from the grassy knoll, but as we all know, the position of the HSCA was that it missed. which is odd. The easiest shot missed, but okay. So yeah, I mean, I was a little, I had not done as much research then as I've done since then. That was 1998. So I wish I could interview him all over again, but that's not going to ever happen, because I would definitely ask different questions. But that was kind of my debut of really going toe to toe with anybody. But it was still pretty laid back. I remember he gave me some type of a handout before I left of a talk that he says, this is the talk I always give on the Kennedy assassination. And it was kind of bland and really not very engaging, to be honest with you, but it was his shtick, as it were. Oddly enough, the acoustics didn't come up that day, and I cannot remember why exactly, but that's how the whole thing started. Really, interviewing Blakey was probably the turning point for me as far as really diving into it. I mean, I dove into it. It's not my initial, because I was alive when it happened, and my mom cut out all the newspaper articles and scrapbooks and gave them to me, and she had read a few books on the assassination. And then I was only 7 years old, so it isn't like I'm going to the National Archives doing research. But probably the turning point for me was Goodnight America in March. I think it was March 6, 1975, if I'm not mistaken, when Grodin showed the Zapruder film on national television. Because what you saw is not what you would expect to see, given what the Warren Commission had said happened. So that was a big turning point for me. And then, in those days, everything was snail mail and making long distance telephone calls to people like Harold Weisberg and people like that. I remember I'd write Weisberg, it'd take forever to get there, and then he would type something back and it took forever. I mean, we're talking like this would go on like one, maybe two exchanges per month tops. So it was a different world back then when you're doing research. I mean, you could get stuff from National Archives, I guess, but still everything was just almost in slow motion compared. I mean, what we're doing today would have been unheard of back then, of course, because it didn't exist. But so yeah, that's how the whole thing started, I guess. Was probably the Goodnight America episode, my talk with Blakey. Of course, JFK did make an impact in the movie, because everyone was talking about it. So yeah, that's what started the whole thing.
And what about Marina? I mean, obviously, very few people over the years have got to speak to Marina. What are your thoughts on her?
I didn't really learn anything talking with Marina as much as it was just interesting to talk to Marina. I brought up the backyard photographs. I brought up a lot of things that other people had already brought up. So there was not any real revelation that I recall from talking to Marina. She was very kind. She was very, forthcoming as far as when I would ask her a question. Much different than her testimony before the HSCA, which almost every other word out of her mouth is "I don't know" or "I forgot." And so Marina is, at the end of the day, Marina is just frustrating because sure, her story has changed a little bit, and I've tried to put myself in her position. And not just to be a hawk and say, "Okay, come on, Marina, buck up. Come forth with some information." I try to put myself in her shoes and what it must have felt like to be her in that position, and that's ultimately impossible to do. But she was very nice to talk with. I just didn't really learn anything, oddly enough. I mean, I asked her everything from the backyard photographs to the famous Hunter of Fascist photographs. Did you was that your signature? All kinds of things. And at the end of the conversation, when I hung up the phone, I didn't know anything more than before I called her. It was just nice to talk to her, I guess. But that was it. Someone said to me the other day, "Well, why don't you try to call her again?" I would have no desire to talk to Marina right now. I mean, it isn't because Tim Smith calls her, she's all of a sudden going to have an epiphany and spill her guts to me about something she's never said to anybody. So to me, it'd just be an absolute waste of time, I think.
It's interesting you say that, because I asked Larry Hancock the same question a few months ago in the spring. He's done a revisit on Oswald, which is somewhat controversial, and he also felt that it would be a waste of time, talking to her. So that's not an unreasonable point. So having reached out to Blakey, had you already had in mind that you wanted to go down the HSCA route, or was it because he was one of your first guys that's why you decided to?
Well, it was Neil. It was Right. It was partly that. And when I left, Blake, he told me, he says, anytime you want to talk, just, you have my phone number, give me a call here at his office at Notre Dame, where he was teaching law at the time. And so I did a few times, and he was always kind and giving on information. Again, no great revelations, but my decision ultimately to write the book was because nobody had really written much about the HSCA. Obviously Gaten Fonzia had written a really interesting book on the inner workings and background stuff, and it's very good. But I kind of got the idea really when I picked up Walt Brown's book, War and Omission, where he goes through all 488 of the Warren Commission witnesses. I thought, why don't I do that with the HSCA? Now, he just gives little paragraph blurbs for the most part. There's a couple of them he may go a page or two. But for the most part, they're like just a few paragraphs. I thought, no, if I'm going to do the HSCA, since there's only 52, not 488, excuse me, I can go into hopefully a little more depth on them. And so that's what I decided to do. And I just started pecking away at it and getting files, information, contacting people. And it was my first stab at it for my master's degree was in the late 90s, if I'm not mistaken, 1998 or so. And I didn't pick this up again until the summer of 2000, I think in 22 maybe. So it had been almost 25 years since I'd even looked at it. And when I looked at it, Neil, I was embarrassed. It's like, oh my gosh, did I actually hand this in as a master's thesis? This is awful. I mean, it's beyond awful. But they didn't know anything, so they didn't know how awful it was. So I decided, okay, I need to revisit this old friend and really expand it and see where it goes. And so in the summer, I think it was 2022, I wrote the book that we're talking about today.
Mm-hmm. So let's. I mean, obviously, there's a whole bunch of seasoned and veteran researchers and enthusiasts here, but ultimately, this will be uploaded as well. So perhaps for a wider audience. Right. Should we go through some of the basics of the HSCA with respect to the Kennedy assassination part of it? What's your insight in terms of how they carved up responsibilities and how they assigned personnel? I think
that was a big problem.
I think we're more familiar with the Warren Commission and the areas that were focused on. How was it done in the HSCA in terms of lawyers and investigators, researchers, etc., and the actual subject matters that they tackled?
Well, if you'll notice, the way the book is set up is, as you said, how they chronologically had these people appear before the committee and ask them questions. And by the way, nobody, for the most part, was caught off guard with the question, because they were given the questions and they rehearsed this ahead of time. I only know that because when I requested the documents concerning Ida Docs, I also got the warm-up questions, which were for the most part the questions that they asked her. So when they put, for example, Ida Docs, I think she was the fourth witness to appear, it was a fait accompli. I mean, there was nothing, she wasn't going to say anything that was going to shock them because they'd already gone over the questions with her. Blakey told me that the order in which they appeared before the committee was basically the HSCA's presentation to the American public. In other words, this is what we found. And for the most part, it was fairly scientific. You had the doctors in one group, you had maybe chemists in another group. And so they were the mafia related, they're bunched together. And Blakey said we did that on purpose, obviously, as a way to present the evidence.
So, I mean, in terms of the statistics, I mean, you mentioned 52 public hearings. 75 people were questioned in executive sessions.
Right.
And there's a stunning number in your book. 41 were granted immunity, and of course, none were granted immunity with respect to the Warren Commission.
Right. Exactly.
What's your take on those statistics? Does that seem the right kind of ratio? I mean, you also allude to the fact that only 9 witnesses appeared at both the HSCA and the Warren Commission. What's your take on all that part of it?
Well, I think the Warren Commission people were brought in to solidify and say, look, there's really nothing new here. I mean, when I would start reading their testimony, very early in almost every testimony, I would get the impression, yep, the fix is in. They know exactly what they're doing. They know exactly where they're going. And it's just Oswald did it all over again. What Blakey wasn't expecting was Mary Farrell. He wasn't expecting someone like that say, hey, guess what? We have a possible audio recording. And I'm sure Blakey went, what? I mean, I think part of Blakey, when you listen to him, and even though we didn't really talk acoustics when I interviewed him, Blakey did say, he kind of like, he almost enjoyed emphasizing that we did something the Warren Commission didn't do. We discovered something they didn't discover, type of a thing. And so he was kind of proud of that. Didn't really elaborate on it very much when I talked with him. But besides if you don't have the acoustic evidence, it's pretty much the Warren Commission all over again, as far as I'm concerned. Are there some differences? Of course. I'm not saying it was just a complete rubber stamp, but if you don't have the acoustics, and even then, I mean, it's beyond ridiculous. Like, okay, we're going to admit there was a probable conspiracy, and guess what? The easiest shot possible, even though the other shots were dead-eye dick, the easiest shot misses everything. Like, okay, that's odd, but you know, and so, you know, at the end of the day, what was the point? You know, I mean, sure, Blakey has admitted later on, okay, the CIA lied to him and the whole Joanides thing. But beyond that, Blakey still to this day believes in the single bullet theory. He still thinks Oswald was the one that was firing from the 6th floor window. So what ultimately there is a difference. I think what you have to do is what I decided to do when I wrote my book and say, okay, if the only thing I do is simply regurgitate Warren Commission data and maybe give a little analysis, I'm not sure I've really done anything. Anybody could have done that, for goodness sakes. So what I tried to do is update the evidence as best I could through about the year 2022, while looking at everything from further acoustics analysis, neutron activation analysis, some stuff done by unknown researchers for the most part, like David Wimp and Keith Fitzgerald. And I think they really, you know, pushed the ball forward down the field. So really, it's a book about the HSCA, but it's almost like it's the HSCA plus, you know, ... Because if I would have just stopped in 1978 when they did, it's a nice little historical relic and a guide, but I don't think I'm really adding to the case a whole lot if I would have stopped in 1978. So I did the best I could, and I'm sure I missed things and, you know, probably made some blunders along the way, but I tried to bring it through the year 2022 as best I could.
Yeah, I think that's a very fair point. I mean, it struck me that you know, whilst I was reading it, you're having to relate back to the Warren Commission and other bodies and committees that met, as well as taking it far forward into the future as new research comes out. And so it isn't a dead documentation per se. It's very much a vibrant book with the cross-referencing into the past and to the future. Yeah. So I would agree with that. I think you succeeded in that. In terms of you know, ahead of this talk, I was thinking about the HSCA in terms of its kind of overall strengths and weaknesses, so I kind of looked at it from a balance sheet perspective: what's positive and what's negative. I must say, this is my take, and I'd love to hear your opinion, but what you agree with, disagree with, and you know what you'd like to elaborate on. But to me, there's a lot less positive than there are negatives.
I agree. Absolutely.
Of the whole thing. If we take the positives first, and you can chip in as and when you want. I mean, the science-based approach is not necessarily a fallacious approach. It's quite a good idea. You know, so I see that as a reasonable, you know, evidence-based, bring in experts kind of idea, as not being off the wall. The fact that he was confronted with the acoustic evidence also meant that, you know, had to bring something to the party that wasn't there before.
Yes, he did.
They did ultimately conclude that it was probably a conspiracy, although their conclusion says 4 shots when he actually thought it was 5 shots, which is kind of interesting that the public wasn't. That was probably just too much to swallow.
Well, Blakey told me that. He said the reason, he said, I knew there was 5, but he said it was going to be a hard sell with 4. He said it was going to be an impossible sell if I tried to hold on to the 5. he knew there was 5. He believed there was 5. He said, "There's no way in God's green earth I was going to say that."
Yeah. I also think another conclusion that Patrick Dean probably let Ruby in is
Sure.
quite interesting and ballsy, if you like.
Right.
And the other thing is, I mean, they did at least have their own investigators, so
Sure.
they weren't solely dependent or reliant upon the agencies. They hired a lot of ex-homicide department research investigators. So that was kind of my positive wrap up. Do you agree? Is there anything you'd like to add on that stuff that you think that I've missed that is pretty good?
No, I'm not sure that you really missed anything. What I would say, and what happened when I began to read the testimony, sometimes I would be reading the testimony and I would see implications of where it could have gone, but it didn't. And there were times in the book I took it where I thought it could go and push it as far as I could. Something maybe that Connolly said or something that Ida Doc said. I said, oh, okay, there's something rotten in Denmark here. So let's push this a little bit and see where it goes. And sometimes I think it bore fruit and sometimes it didn't bear fruit. But Ida Dox was, we'll get to her, but she was.
Oh, absolutely. We're going to get to Ida Dox. Yeah, that's a biggie. But if we look at the other side of the balance sheet, the negatives, I mean, and where do we start? But obviously the transition or shift from Sprague to Blakey had repercussion, and obviously appeasing the CIA, was a real problem. But also Blakey's lack of transparency struck me. I think it was you mentioned that he moved the 800 files that they gave to NARA shouldn't be released for 50 years. I mean, where is that in terms of transparency? I mean, you've alluded to the full shot from the grassy knoll and the fact that it missed. I mean, that's just so implausible that
ridiculous.
I don't even know what to say on that, really, to be honest with you.
Well,
so yeah, please, yeah.
Yeah. At times you're left almost baffled by things like that, and we're talking about the negatives. The negatives, it's the same old canards that come up again. At the end of the day, Oswald did it, even though in chapter 1 of Connolly, I tried to argue that not Oswald didn't do it. Oswald couldn't have done it based on certain things. But it's the same old thing, that nonsense about, the bullets can be traced back to Oswald's rifle to the exclusion of all other rifles. Well, recent research by Eric Randage and Spiegelman and people like that, Grant, have absolutely destroyed that. I mean, that's just something we need to put in the dumpster of evidence and never look at it again. But we didn't have that back then. We didn't have that information at the time of the HSCA. These, doctoral degree metallurgists looking at everything going, no, this is not, Wynn is wrong. So, when you're reading it, it's just like, okay, this is the Warren Commission again, and so, Blakey talks about Jack White was not a good person maybe to interview, but some of the other people, especially some of the old Warren Commission witnesses, by the way, who are all in the room at the same time. Are you kidding me?
That was one of the things I was going to say. I mean, how that, and it's very clear throughout the book, they're interviewing clutches of witnesses with respect to their sort of specialist environment. Right. And they're all sitting there together. Yeah. And after witness number 1 has gone up, it's so easy. I mean, it's just a get out of jail card for number 2 or number 3 witness, because they can just so easily corroborate what the primary witness has said. And I mean, it's just such a flawed structure. I mean, talking of flawed structures, the other negative there was the fact that the groups, we touched on, the groups, and I'm still not clear as to what all the various groups were. Right. They weren't allowed to communicate with each other. It was very much compartmentalized.
I put Thomas Canning's letter in my book that he wrote to Blakey. I mean, it's like this. Why can't we talk to each other? medical couldn't talk to photography couldn't talk to whatever. It's ridiculous. You would want those people to talk to each other, not talk to each other. And I would just say, I wish I'd have been on my game a little bit when I was talking to Blakey, especially the first time. I said, why wouldn't you want these people to talk to each other? If there's one thing I would want, it would be talk to each other, try to cover something. No.
Absolutely.
And that tells me they knew exactly what they were doing. They did. And it's sad because it could have been so much more and so much better than it was. But it was stifled from the top down.
Yeah, absolutely. Obviously, the CIA component, I would say, is obviously extremely negative. I mean, we can't dismiss that. And you look at, Fonzie wasn't able to persuade Blakey that Vessiana and Odio, should appear in the public testimony, and they get 2.25 pages in the whole report, and Atlee Phillips is not even mentioned. I mean, you've got this obfuscation that is so clear. When you read your book,
but instead Blakey wanted to, he was all in on the mob. So let's have Ralph Salerno, let's have Traficante, let's have those boys, and that's fine. But it's not a matter of either or. Have them if you want to have them, but put in Odio, put in Vessiana. But I mean, just say how ridiculous it is. You could have had Sylvia Odio, but instead you have Jack White.
I know.
I'm not trying to be uncharitable toward Jack White.
We can probably get on to the makeup and what your sort of ideal squad would have been, but I mean that I suppose it's a segue into the lack of John Q witnesses. I mean, no ear, eye, nasal witnesses or anything of that ilk was came to the fore. Well, why no Ruth Payne? Why no Jackie? I mean, at that point, you probably could have asked Jackie. It was a long time after the event. I mean, I'm stunned that there are no Secret Service agents who were in Dealey Plaza at the time.
Right. Nope.
None of them appeared at the HSCA.
I mean, Ruth Payne was asked over 5,000 questions, more than anybody for the Warren Commission. She doesn't get any.
Yeah. I know. Absolutely ridiculous. And the other thing we kind of touched on a little bit there is these cluster of witnesses, how they marginalise those that weren't really towing the party line. A good example being Cyril Wecht, where he's squeezed between the two doctors that are kind of pro Warren Commission. I mean that's not just Wecht that it happened to, is it?
No. I mean, when Wecht began talking about the Zapruder film, well, Dr. Wecht, photography is not exactly your specialty, so let's just stick to your specialty. But when Larry Sturtevant did it, go for it. Okay.
I know the hypocrisy it comes across obviously very much so in the book. And I mean, going back to the CIA, of course, the other thing is they were allowed, to sign off on any of their material that could be used in the public domain. I mean, it's just I mean, the Lopez report being suppressed. I mean, it just it continues. So, I mean, have I missed anything? Oh, yes, probably I have missed. You mentioned that. I mean, the all-in cost was $5.5 million, wasn't it? I mean, did the public get value for money for $5.5 million? Did they deliver the bare facts or not?
No, they did not. I think if there is, the good news is the acoustics evidence for me, and I know that's controversial even amongst researchers, and that's fine. If I disagree with someone on the acoustics, my response is probably okay. I mean, I'm not going to go into a hissy fit over it, for goodness sakes. I happen to believe it. Others don't, even within the conspiracy community. And that's fine. But for my money, I think they did really good work. I think Barger did good work. Barger would later on for Josiah Thompson's Last Second Dallas revisit the acoustics evidence, go through all the data again, and came to the same firm conclusion that absolutely there was a shot 12 feet west of the corner of the stockade fence. There it is. So if you once you buy into that, but then Blakey would agree with that. It's just the shot missed.
Which is incredible. Well, look, that's a really good sort of background, to you and your research journey and your views on the committee as a whole. The next section, I'd like to dive much deeper into the book. I haven't been able to monitor the chat. Can I open it up to the floor? Are there any questions from you guys with respect to what Tim has already said? And unmute yourself if you can ask a question, please.
I've got one question.
Sure.
Go on, Bart.
Okay. I found myself, I've looked into the HSCA when it comes to the Dallas police. And if you just look at all these interviews, the majority of them are more or less just used to confirm what was said during the Warren Commission.
Absolutely.
Instead of like trying to look into a new field. And
right.
They were incredibly, for me, negligent in that area of actually reinvestigating the Dallas police and the Dallas FBI for what they've done during that time in those days. Why was this so poorly researched and done as such?
That's a good question. I'm not sure I know the answer to the question, except that the HSCA, sure, they talked to Dallas police, but not really. I mean, you would think someone like Jim Lavelle would have been brought up. You'd think, L.C. Graves, somebody, or I forget the cop who he rode with Oswald back from the Texas Theater, who I actually talked to on the phone.
Sergeant Hill.
Yeah, Hill. It was Sergeant Hill. And I talked to him over the phone one time. My feeling on the Dallas cops is maybe a little different. I agree. I think it's more ineptitude and negligence. I mean, it's just odd. On the day of the assassination, if you were not scheduled to work that day, you stayed home. No, it wasn't like everybody was called in because the president's coming to town. Nothing changed whatsoever. That was your day off. That was your day off. You're on vacation. You're on vacation. I mean, nobody said, okay, president's coming. We got to really tighten things up. And they didn't, oddly enough. There are horror stories of people who have interviewed Dallas cops. Not that every Dallas cop was a, KKK racist, for goodness sakes. Some were. Lavelle being one of them, by the way. He's about as racist as you're going to get, and just off the cuff, natural matter of fact, talking about it. So they were certainly no friends of John Kennedy, that's for sure. Here comes this, liberal from Massachusetts, Harvard educated. They had no love for this guy, trust me. So I don't think that they were going to go out of their way necessarily to stop anything from happening. I'm not sure they were even upset when it did happen, to be honest with you. Some of them may have been, to be sure. I always thought Jesse Curry was disturbed by the whole thing, to be honest with you. And he ended up, I think, at the end of his life, he became a guard at a bank, doing that kind of work. But he often said, certain things. We couldn't put Oswald in that window. He wishes, and maybe Nancy can chime in on this. He wishes he would have talked to de Mohrenschildt and sat down with certain people that they really didn't talk to. So, the Dallas police don't get off the hook by any stretch of the imagination. I don't know how much they would have known. I don't know. So I don't even attempt to speculate on that. But good question.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Bart. Anybody else got a question at this point?
I have a kind of a question comment. I've talked to Buell Frazier a lot the last few years. I asked him about preparation before his interviews. Now, of course, his weren't public, right? They were private, and he was allowed to have his attorney there, which he did for most of the sessions. There were a couple of them, but he said he didn't have any prep. He had tried to hide from the HSCA for quite a while. Before they finally were able to kind of nail him down to get him to come for the interviews. And so that was kind of interesting. So it looks like he either lied to me or they prepped some people and not others. But we saw it sounds like it was pretty blatant with the HSCA, right?
Yes.
Because even Blakey's little narration at the beginning of each section is kind of stupid, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it shows that there were a lot of preconceived ideas on his part.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. But with the Warren Commission, we get little glimpses of some of this pre-stuff because they mess up and they make a statement during the questioning, as we talked last night. Well, they weren't doing their interviewing on the record at night. So they were meeting with these people ahead of time. When I talked with Ruth Payne a couple different times over the last 20 years, she told me that they went to dinner with these people that were questioning them. She had to explain to them all about the Payne financial background and how Michael had a trust fund and all of that because they were very suspicious about them being paid to do something. And she said that, and there's little references to, uh, at lunch you told me this, blah blah blah, and so let's talk about that a little bit more. And then there's all that off the record stuff, which is God knows what was in that because we don't have those transcripts of the off the record things. So there was a little bit of dipping into that with the Warren Commission too, but of course there weren't public hearings like the House did, which, God bless them for doing that. But it was so staged and it was so, I mean, I remember when that was happening and I was trying to watch that. I was breaking out on my lunch hour where I was working to try to go and at least catch an hour or two of whoever was on that day. And they had Wit on one of the days that I was able to break away of all the waste of time that there is, right?
Oh my God.
And just kind of watching those, House people laughing at the fact about, oh, don't aim it at me and that kind of stuff. It kind of showed the lack of, scholarly. It's not as bad as the Luna hearings now that we have, which are really quite as unaudacious as you can possibly get. But it did kind of set a tone, I think. Were you able to determine, here's finally my question, were you able to determine, Tim, how they made the decision about whether someone would be public or private?
Blakey told me that the people who were chosen to give public testimony were the people that best explained the final evidence and the final conclusions that the HSCA arrived at. That's why they picked who they did. You mentioned about being prepped. I think a lot of people, like you said, Wesley Frazier, excuse me, was not prepped. And my guess is that's because he was not a public witness. If you're going to be a public witness, every one of those were very thoroughly prepped, would be my guess. And some of them I know for sure was because I have the documents. I think the one thing that commented on some things that you said, Nancy, is when I think of the Warren Commission and I read the testimony, the impression I get when I read it is this is way too sanitized. In other words, nobody seems very often to say, can you restate the question? Can you repeat that? Whereas they at least did that for the HSCA from time to time. They said, I'm not sure you understand what I'm saying, so they would repeat it. The Warren Commission didn't seem to hardly ever do that. And then you mentioned Wit, which we'll probably get into at length. But yeah, that just turned into it was a farce. Cynthia Cooper opens the umbrella and it opens up, opposite, and like it's out in the middle of a rainstorm and it's windy, and everybody laughs, ha 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 ha. And I'm thinking, what's funny about this? I didn't find it. I found it offensive, to be honest with you. If Wit is even the guy to begin with, and I have serious doubts about that.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Nancy. Well, look, I'd like to get into we will discuss testimonies, I think, later on, Tim, particularly the shambolic ones.
Sure.
there are quite a few. But with respect to the book, and again, I might be on my own here, and,
sure.
In terms of your opinions and it being new news to me, but it seems that some of your big revelations and opinions are just not consistent with what I would call the JFK assassination law. And I don't mean it, I don't mean it in an offensive way. You know,
No.
we're not. I'm not. You know, you're not supporting. You know, Greer shot, Kennedy or Jackie shot. You know, we're not talking about out there stuff. But
Right.
these are some of the things I noted when I
Okay.
read through the book. The 4-shot sequence and which shots hit who. That's
Yeah.
certainly different, I think, to mainstream thinking, and I think we need to delve deep on that.
Sure.
The back of the head Fox photo relative to Ida Doc's sketch is
Yeah.
a fascinating story, and I think we must get into detail on that. And that's just really, really interesting. And also, obviously, the way she responded to you when you approached her.
To say the least.
The one that really blew my mind, so to speak, if I can use that metaphorically rather than literally, was the 11 degrees rising back wound that
Right.
both Varden and Wet agreed upon. I mean, that is
true.
really interesting. I had no idea. Maybe I'm out there on my own, but that I thought was fascinating.
Yeah.
You don't subscribe to a frontal throat shot, which again is part of the first question.
That is true.
You seem to be extremely positive on the acoustics evidence, and as you alluded to, that the community split on that.
Yes, they are.
So I think that's worth really elaborating upon as well. You're not really a photo and film alterationist guy per se.
Nope.
You certainly believe the backyard photos aren't faked, so that's
Right.
I think worth exploring as
Sure.
well. And you know, you're not unduly negative on the idea that Oswald actually brought in a Carcano that
That's
morning.
true.
So
That's
again, that I would argue is not a mainstream perspective either. So there's probably half a dozen areas I've just touched on there that to me was quite significant opinions. Can we go through these? Do you want to just elaborate as and when? Yeah. Okay.
Sure, go ahead.
Well, off you go. You wherever you want to start. What do you feel the most strongly about?
That's interesting. I'm not sure how strong I feel about any of them. Although, listen, I'm sitting there thinking, wow, I guess I'm not very mainstream, am I? But I mean, I have thought about them. I mean, let's talk about the throat wound, okay?
Yeah.
I can remember reading, what was his name? It's called Cover Up, Stuart Gallinore's book. And in there, and I think I remark about this in my book, that the hole gets bigger going from front to back, if I'm not mistaken, which would indicate a shot from the front, the throat shot. My problem with the throat shot from the front is, where's the bullet? I mean, apparently it wasn't in JFK's body. Then where would it be? Would it be somewhere in the limo? But not my knowledge is. So one of my big reasons for not buying the throat shot. Now, when I say that, let me make this perfectly clear. It is possible I'm wrong. There's a revelation, but I'm just saying what I think about when I think about the throat shot is that, and here's what you always hear. Well, the entrance is going to be smaller than the exit. Well, that's true, but not always. The majority of the time, it probably will be, but not always. But if that is a throat wound, where the heck did the bullet go? That's what I want. I just want to. That's my only question: is where is the bullet? And if the back wound is rising at 11 degrees, which both Wecht and Baden agree on, one of the few things they do agree on, it would make perfect sense that that bullet is rising at 11 degrees, that it goes out the throat and halfway down the city of Dallas, and that bullet is never found. So that is kind of my take on that. I don't need a front throat shot. Besides, if you have a front throat shot, then why didn't the acoustics pick up 2 shots from the front? But they don't. They only pick up 1, and the one was at 313, which we all agree on that. That's one thing we can all throw the cards in on. But it seems to me that if there's a second one from the front, the acoustics miss that, but they get everything else. So again, I have problems, and I'm sure people could raise questions that would, cause me to pause on thinking that there's not a shot from the front. And I know Malcolm Perry said, it's the famous scene in the new Oliver Stone documentary when I can't remember the gentleman's name, talking to him years later, and he finally looked at the guy and says, the throat shot was a shot from the front, period. And he just stopped talking about it. So how do you argue with that? He was there, I wasn't. So yeah, I am I 100% sure? Oh God, no. You know, I just have some serious questions about it. And it seems to make sense that if the bullet is rising from 11 degrees upward in the back, makes perfect sense that it went out the throat and halfway down the city of Dallas. That's why that bullet was never found, and why the acoustics. So the acoustics and the back wound are a couple of things that bother me of there being a shot from the front.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, if we just for the benefit of others, and please tell me if this is I've misinterpreted this. Your first shot is through the back, exit through the throat, and we just don't know where it goes. It could have hit the windscreen, chrome, could have hit T.
Absolutely.
Could have gone anywhere. Could have gone anywhere.
Sure.
The second shot is the Connolly back wound, which exits his chest,
right,
and then fragments in the car well.
Yep.
The third shot being the headshot from the front, which exits the rear, the 313, and then the final shot, and you have it at 326.8 on the Z film. It goes through the hole, effectively, that's been already created, and it exits and hits Connolly in the wrist, and then potentially ends up in the leg, because we still don't know about that, of course. So that's a fair summary of your 4-shot sequence, yes?
It is. There's obviously if I believe there's 5 shots, that means there's a shot missing.
Yeah.
And I never could figure out how to put the 5th shot in there, except to say, which I don't say, that, oh, you know, the shot that missed everything. But to me, the tag shot, if the tag shot is a shot that misses everything, who's shooting that day? Are you kidding me? I mean, these guys are good. They're hitting Kennedy in the head twice, hitting him in the back, hitting Connolly in the back. But then all of a sudden, out of the blue, one shot misses an entire road and goes over to the following street. To me, whoever was shooting that day, they were good. And these aren't people that miss. But that day, you have me in the window missing everything. I mean, it doesn't make any sense. I think whatever hits tag is probably a fragment that comes out of the car and hits the curb and then flies up and hits tag in the face. I don't think it was a whole bullet that hit over there at all, because I just don't think they're going to miss that. For goodness sakes, I wouldn't have missed that badly, let alone a professional assassin. So yeah, I get that would be my sequence of shots. And the big revelation for me is the shot at 327. And if you read the HSCA report, it's in the report. They just ran out of time, but they talk about it, that, you know, the possibility of a shot at 327. And Baden would have talked about it, but they ran out of time doing, you know, acoustic stuff and mafia stuff, so they didn't have time to do it. But if there's not a shot at 327, then you have to explain why in 0.7 of a second, the right side of Kennedy's head, that wound doubles in size. And I mean doubles in size. You just place 313, 314 next to 327, 328, 329. It's like, holy smoke, this thing has doubled in size. And not only has the wound doubled in size, Kennedy goes forward faster than in any other time, including 313 when he goes backwards. But he goes forward faster than he went backwards at 313 and 327, according to the calculations. So, and he goes further. And you say, well, maybe what stopped Kennedy going backwards further was the seat, which no question about that. But there has to be some explanation as to why his head opens up 0.7 of a second after the headshot. And I mean, it massively opens up. And if there's not a shot at 327 approximately, then I don't know how to explain that. And 327 would, that's exactly where the acoustics has it as well. So there is corroboration there. But when we get into these areas, Neil, I may sound like I'm speaking very dogmatically, oh, it has to, but I can assure you, I'm not. I'm just simply saying this is my my analysis, and I could be wrong.
So this is, I mean, a lot of this is based on acoustic and the Z film. I don't recall you doing any kind of trajectory analysis in your book. You didn't do that, did you?
I don't believe that I did. No.
No. So do you have I mean, as a researcher, do you have an opinion on Sniper's Nest, the Dallas Records building, the Dowtex building, the southwest corner of the TSBD? Do you have any views on that? To line up with the 5-shot scenario, for example.
I have no doubt that one could have come from the southwest window on the 6th floor. I have no doubt, because I don't think Oswald was up there. So whoever's shooting would not have been him. The county records building, the Deltec building, all would fit my scenario rather than especially Connolly's wound in his back and in his chest. I think it was at 27 degrees, which fits perfectly. And I can't remember if it's the county records building or the Deltec building. I think it was the county records building. Fits perfectly, 27 degrees if someone's on the roof or thereabouts. So I say yes to your question, but again, not with an overwhelming amount of confidence. That's just kind of my opinion based on previous analysis. But you're right. I mean, you can't say what I'm saying and all of a sudden have no opinion on where you think the shots came from. So yeah, sure.
Okay. I mean, I think that's fair enough. Mike Dvoretsky, would you like to come in at this point? I know that you have similar views on some of this stuff. Is there any comments you'd like to make, Mike?
Well, some. First of all, the back wound in Kennedy didn't penetrate very far in. And at least there is some evidence now available that it fell out and dropped into the back seat of the car. You've all heard about that Secret Service agent who kept his secret for years and years, that he found a bullet in the car and picked it up because he was worried about souvenir hunters or something silly. And he took it and put it on a stretcher in the hospital.
Right.
Okay, well, that explains a lot, but it's also a very strange way for a person to behave in a serious crime scene sense.
I would agree. That is beyond odd behavior in my book. I just, to this day, and I know when the whole Paul Landis thing came out and everyone just jumped on that bandwagon, I sat back and thought, why does this sound absolutely absurdly ridiculous? Because it does. And honestly, I'll just say it. I don't buy it. I don't buy it for a second. So this bullet popped out of Kennedy's back and just lies on the car, speeding down the road, movement in the back seat. Clint Hill doesn't see anything. I just don't buy it.
Okay, but there's also the problem that the single bullet theory is pretty ridiculous.
Sure.
For any number of reasons, which
sure
I agree. Go into. But we had a few years ago one of the autopsy technicians spoke at a Dallas conference, I think, and I've seen the typed up version of that in the Echo, and he says they probed the back wound with a sound, I think they call it. It's a rod for checking where a wound is going through, and
right. I've heard that too.
Yeah, and it wouldn't go through. And he said he saw the body from the other side after the lungs had been removed, and you could see the back of the chest wall moving where the probe was touching it. So it never went through the body.
Right.
That's why I think the Landis bullet might be a real item rather than crazy.
Right. And it may be. Again, I don't say anything with overt dogmatism. When I first started thinking about the back wound, the one thing I thought about, having no medical expertise at all, is why they did not rotate the musculature of the body to see if it would go through. Because maybe if you rotate the musculature, maybe that's blocking when they were trying to probe it. But I've never heard anybody talk about it, and so I assume that there must be something I'm not thinking of. Is why they didn't do it. So,
well, aside from the fact that somebody saw the probe pushing at the chest wall and inside, I don't know exactly what the anatomy is, but you can see it bulging a little bit where the probe was going. And at least, fortunately, they didn't try to push it really hard to make a hole where there wasn't one before inside.
That's true.
And of course, there was no evidence of a bullet penetrating through the lungs in any way.
That's true. That's true. Well, here's the deal. If what you say about JFK's back wound is true, then my theory is wrong. Well, game over. I mean,
we've all had wrong theories at times.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah.
I have another question about something completely different.
Sure.
And I don't think this ever really came up in the Warren Commission or even in the Select Committee at the House.
Mm-hmm.
There was paint on the curb that you can see, yellow paint in like dashes along a few feet of the curb, and then another dash, and then another one. And some people I've heard said they stepped in it, it was still wet.
Uh-huh.
And it wasn't put there by the city of Dallas.
True. True.
Where the hell did it come from? But it would be a perfect way of marking out in advance your sniper's position.
Absolutely.
Exact place where you want to fire your shot.
I've heard that, but I honestly don't know any more than what you just said.
Okay,
but I have heard the same thing.
The painted curb is visible in the Zapruder film.
Okay. Okay. Yeah.
At least I see it there.
Right. Oh, sure.
Do other people say that they've seen it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. I've seen
So,
it.
Mike, if I recall, you don't believe that there was a frontal throat wound. Do you think it was a fragment that from a headshot? Is that my recall correctly?
Yes, I put that in my comments. Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's the most likely source of that.
Yeah.
It doesn't explain why the doctors thought it looked like an entry wound,
Right.
in
Right.
terms of the bruising around it. But then, they get these things wrong from time to time. Anyway,
Sure.
it basically,
So do you?
small wound.
So, Mike, do you think as he emerges from the sign, when his arms are up, do you think he's responding at that point to a back shot?
Yes.
That's some kind of a spasm, maybe related
Yes.
to the brace.
Yes,
And then later on, where the more fatal shots are occurring, one or two, that's when some fragment travels internally and comes out of the front of the throat. Is that your thesis?
that's a guess. Yeah.
Yeah.
I can't otherwise account for the throat wound because the bullet didn't go through from the back. And as you've all said, there's no way that a throat wound was fired from the front. So that's
Right.
the only alternative, unless there really wasn't a throat wound and the doctors were lying. And I don't find that very credible.
No, I don't either. I agree.
All right. Well, look. Let's go back to the 11 degrees rising back wound, because I find that very difficult to imagine. In my mind, in terms of the position of the body and where that could possibly have come from.
I agree.
So, what have you? It just seems such a ridiculous assertion. You've obviously got to take in the slope, the bending of the body, and all this sort of stuff.
Right.
But it still seems such a ludicrous angle. And so you concur that it's really quite difficult to determine where that possibly could have come from.
Absolutely. And I asked Wecht and I asked Baden, and I think it was in 2003 at the WEC conference. And I said, how did you come to that determination? They said, well, bullets are hot, they strike the flesh, they burn the flesh, and then forensic pathologists are trained based on what they call the abrasion collar. You can determine the angle of declination and inclination. And now keep in mind, they don't have the body making this determination. They have autopsy photographs to make this determination. But they said based on how they read the abrasion collar on the back wound of the autopsy photographs, both Wecht and Baden were in agreement, oddly enough, that the bullet was rising at 11 degrees. But the problem with that, as you say, Niels, where the heck did that bullet come from? That means you have to be 11 degrees below the level plane. Where would that be? And that creates a problem. I've heard some people say, well, that's not my problem to try to figure out where someone was actually at when they fired the bullet. The only thing I can tell you is that the scientific evidence says it was rising at 11 degrees, though nowhere in the HSCA volumes or in the HSCA report does it say 11 degrees.
Yeah.
Nowhere.
No, that's what I'm saying. That was a real revelation to me. But
yeah,
as I say, I just can't figure out where the possible source of that bullet is.
Yeah.
It is interesting that both Baden and Wecht are on completely different sides of the fence here.
Right.
And
right.
From a scientific or evidential point of view, that's the same conclusion that they came to.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I don't think we were going to be able to solve the shot sequence and the sources of the bullets. I think we've tried before.
Right.
Before? I mean, the Idodox thing I think is obviously quite an important thing. We can do that separately. This notion that you don't object to the idea that Oswald may have brought in the Carcano that morning. That is definitely against most mainstream
True.
thinking. What in particular is leading you to that kind of opinion?
I think part of it is the whole curtain rod thing to me is just maybe a little too convenient. I know that's not hard evidence, but that's where I will start. I think it's very plausible that, I mean, whether you think Oswald shot or not, which I don't think he fired a rifle that day, but he certainly allowed himself to be used by handlers. And I think one of the things they may have had him do was bring in the Carcano from Ruth Payne's house and put it up there. I'm not sure he had any idea why they were doing that, except he was just told to do it and he did it. And I think Oswald, given, I don't want to do a psychological autopsy on Oswald right now, but he does seem to be the type of person who, if he's made to feel like he's doing something, I don't know, secret agent like, he would have fallen for that hook, line, and sinker, do this and blah, blah, blah. And so I think it's highly possible that Oswald's not taking curtain rods at all, is that he's taken the rifle and just depositing it in the book depository that day. But never, I don't think the thought ever entered his mind to fire it that day. I think it was just put in there as a prop. Here are the shells. We'll link that to the rifle, blah, blah, blah. We'll link this back to Oswald because he was probably told to order it at some point. And to me, I just think it's a prop. So again, that's one of those things. Do I know that for sure? Of course I don't know that for sure. But that's my take. And I know this is really silly to say, but I just ask people, what's your gut tell you? Does your gut really tell you that he was taking curtain rods in that day? I mean, does Oswald seem like the curtain rod type of a guy that's going to spruce up his little hovel that he's living in on Beckley? He doesn't come across that way to me. And so for me, it just makes more sense that he's putting a prop in there. He doesn't know it's going to incriminate him, but I still think he's probably doing it. Now, again, it's one of those, if I find out that I'm wrong, I'll have the same response. Huh.
But I mean, obviously the alternatives are he was bringing in lunch.
Right.
If it's not curtain rods, and if it is the rifle, it's got to be broken down.
Sure.
Because of the whole 24/7, 24/8 inches.
Absolutely.
Testimony, if you believe it, from Lily May and
Right.
and Fraser, but then there's no evidence of oil or scratching. Nope. Or internally, if the paper bag is a true exhibit anyway, which of course is another complete story.
Yeah. The paper bag thing to me is just hilarious.
Okay. Before we get on to the acoustic evidence and the Idodox, both I think which are quite big, parts of your book. We mentioned that you're not an film alterationist fan, which will please some of our people in the audience today, that's for sure. You spoke to Marina, and I think she said to you that she did take a couple of the backyard photos. And was it you that she said, but she took them from a different angle, not back towards the steps? Was that you that discovered that?
I don't recall that she said that to me off the top of my head. But I think, and it's been a while since I talked to Marina, I think she told me that she took two that day for sure. But here's a problem that I have, Neil, with whether it's the backyard photographs, the Zapruder film, there is a problem with the back of the head autopsy photograph. There's no question about that. So if there's anything that may have been fudged, it would have been that one. The problem I have is if you're talking about the evidence in the case, and you're talking about the Zapruder film, you're talking about the majority of the autopsy photographs, the backyard, if everything is fake, then there's nothing to talk about. How do you discuss fake evidence? So if it's all fake, then to me, you just have to let that go and talk about things that are legitimate and not fake. So, and to me, it just at times it seems to be stretching logic to the point of credulity to make some of this stuff fake. I just don't think that I don't think you need to have everything fake to make your case. So I tend to shy away from that, I guess. And if you say, well, how do I know for sure that the Z film has not been faked? The only thing I can go by is Raleigh Zavada. He's the expert. I'm not. He looked at it, he said, nope, not fake to me. So I go by that. Again, but I would say, if someone could convince me that it's been faked, well, that would be huge. That would change everything as far as I'm concerned.
I mean, I think there is an argument that, and again, I'm not a photographic expert. There are others here that have got much more credibility, but there is an argument that the backyard photos aren't true. Based on the stance of Oswald, based on the shadows, based on the chin, based on the strap of the rifle, based on the ring. There's a whole bunch of things, and obviously, post facto, that may be easier to manipulate. Whether Roscoe White was involved in this or not is another complete story. But there is. I mean, to me, it doesn't seem to be a hill that one ought to be fighting over.
Right, I agree. To me, there's battles worth fighting, and there's battles not worth fighting. And when you get into those areas, to me, I honestly don't have much interest in it, because I just don't see where it's going to lead us down any path worth going, to be honest with you. I just don't. Me saying that's not going to change anything, as you know, but nonetheless.
No, I mean, he obviously allegedly Oswald said that during one of the interviews that's not me. They've been doctored or whatever.
Right.
But anyway, okay. So we'll move on from that one. Let's go into the acoustic evidence, and obviously there was an array of specialists that were involved in the public hearings. And obviously it's a big finish to the book as well. Can you just explain to us why you are somewhat positive on the acoustic evidence as being credible?
Well, when Blakey got the shock of the acoustics evidence, he called, I think it was the American Acoustical Society or whatever it was, the best people certainly in America when it's dealing with acoustical evidence. And they told him Bolt, Beranek, and Newman. And the poster boy for them to this day is James Barker. And this is the group that looked at the 18-minute gap on the famous Nixon tape and decided it was done on purpose. It was not done accidentally. These are the same people that looked at the shootings at Kent State in May of 1970 and could pinpoint, I mean, within a few inches of where the National Guard guy was standing that fired the rifle. And then later on in the interview, the guy admitted, he says, yep, it was me. And I was standing exactly where you said I was standing. So these guys are good. This isn't Tim Smith looking at acoustical data. These are the best people in their field looking at it. And these guys are acoustical experts. And at the end of the day, and then they bring in Weiss and Ashkenazi, also very reputable acoustical experts, to look over the work of James Barker, and that's when they come up with the famous 95% probability. And then Barker, when you read King Thompson's latest book, Last Second Dallas, Barker and I think one of his associates goes over the evidence again with Thompson, and is even more convincing years later. And so when you say, yeah, well, what about the Ramsey report? Well, there wasn't one acoustical expert on the Ramsey panel. So I'm sorry, we at the end of the day, I think science is going to win this for the conspiracy side. I think they do it with the acoustics. I think they do it through neutron activation analysis. They do it through photography, through film. It's all about science at the end of the day, I think, to prove the case that there was a conspiracy to kill John Kennedy. So, yeah, I stand by what Barker said. I stand by what Weiss and Ashkenazi said. They're the experts. And you're going to have to do more than the Ramsey panel, who didn't have one acoustical expert on the entire panel. So what was the guy's name? I can't remember his name. He died, taught at Marquette. He was always the one, bragging that the acoustic stuff is just pure hokum, but it's not pure hokum. I mean, there's a guy, 12 feet west of the stockade fence that fired that day. I'm absolutely convinced of that. So, yeah, I do stand by the acoustic. I think it's good, hard science, and I think it stands the test. I really do.
I agree with that. And could I also say that there's a paper in a journal called Science and Justice in the year 2001. It's volume 41, page 21 by D.B. Thomas.
Right.
And he went over the acoustical evidence and revisited the echo correlation.
Yep.
And he concluded that the probabilities were a lot higher than even Barger and who was it, Ashkenazi?
Yeah, Ashkenazi and Weiss.
Yeah.
Berger, all three of them.
So he said that claims that the probabilities were really low, 50-50 or something. He said that's garbage.
Yeah.
They're very, very, he gave let's see, I've got the quote here. He says the grassy knoll shot is attributable to random noise at a probability of 0.037. In other words, better than 96% that it was the real thing.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And I think I agree with you. I think Thomas's book, Hear No Evil, is probably, in my opinion, one of the best books I've ever read on the assassination when it deals with the hard scientific evidence. I don't agree with everything that Don Thomas said, and unfortunately, he recently passed away in the past year. But
this isn't the same Thomas, is it?
Yeah, D.B. Thomas, Donald.
DB, okay,
same guy.
Yep. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, I was too. Robbie Robertson had him on his Out of the Blank program a couple times before he died, and they're certainly worth listening to. He knows that he knew that evidence cold, and I just believe it, So
there's one other question about the echo correlations.
Sure.
One of the points made is that the echo that you get from a shot from the schoolbook depository could fit a very wide range of possible origin points other than the 6th floor window.
That is true.
And they could come from the Daltex, maybe from the County Records Building or whatever it's called.
Excuse me.
And it occurs to me that somebody who really knows a lot about computer modeling could take the data in a digitized form, and if they're very good at it, they could construct a model of Dealey Plaza and calculate the best fit for where the stuff comes from, rather than just assuming that it has to come from the 6th floor window.
Right.
And you might get a much higher probability if you found the right location. So it's working backwards from the data rather than making assumptions about what happened and trying to do your best to analyze it.
There are a couple of things that happened on November 22nd that, for what it's worth, are just pure luck that they happened. One was Abraham Zapruder decided to go back home and get his 8mm movie camera, which originally, as we all know, he did not have. He had to go back home and get it. Also, pure luck that the microphone stuck open on the Dallas Police's motorcycle, and for 7 or 8 minutes picks up the assassination. Just imagine where we would be today as Zapruder decided not to go back home and the microphone would not have stuck open. It's a whole different ballgame without those two pieces of evidence. So in some ways, we are incredibly lucky that McLean's microphone stuck open and Zapruder decided to go back home. Zapruder would not have gone back home, by the way, had his employees, implored him, please go back home and get it. And he finally did. So interesting, the twists of fate were certainly on our side that day when it came to those two items.
Okay. All right. Well, let's dive deep into the Fox photograph and Ida Docs. It's a fascinating story. If you could just enlighten the group.
Yeah.
To that. Is there anything you'd like to show us, by the way? Do you want to share any screens and show any work, or would you just want to talk about it?
No, that's fine. I'm good. Yeah.
Okay.
The whole thing started through really a fluke. I was looking, I think it was at David Lifton's book, and there was a picture that Ida had drawn of Kennedy's brain. And I noticed that she didn't sign it. Now that's a minor point. We can all agree on that. And I thought, well, I don't wonder why she didn't sign it. I'll call her on the phone and ask her why she didn't sign it. I mean, this is really minor stuff. Who cares, right? And so I got her phone number, and you'll never believe where she lived at the time when I called her, Bethesda, Maryland, of all places. And it was, I think, October 14th. And I called her on the phone. I think it was 1998, though. I'd have to check that to verify, but it was October 14th, if I'm not mistaken. And she answered the phone, and I had her 11 or 12 questions that the HSCA asked her. I didn't ask her very many. She was in and out very quickly of her questioning. So I thought, I said, Ida, do you mind if I ask you a few questions? At the beginning, she was very accommodating. And I began to ask. I did not tell her that I had her questions before me that I was asking for her HSCA testimony. And every question that I asked her, she lied. Every single one. I mean, 100%. And I finally said, Ida, I hope you're not under the impression that I'm trying to trick you. I'm not trying to confront you. I'm just trying to, I'm just curious why you didn't sign the brain photograph, which, by the way, she never really answered the question. But every other question she lied. I said, Ida, I have your testimony right in front of me. I'm asking you the exact same questions that they asked you before the HSCA. I'm not sure, and every answer you're giving me is different from what they asked you then. And at that point, she got hostile. She was mad, and she kept saying things like, "Well, you know, call Blakey." I said, "Well, I've talked to Blakey, and talking to Docs was after the interview with Blakey, so I'd already talked to Blakey, and but she did not want to talk to me. I can tell you that." And she eventually hung the phone up on me, and so I thought, well, she said, "Never call me again." It was the last thing she said. Click. Of course, you can't hang up now on somebody with a cell phone. I mean, it doesn't really have the same impact. You know, there's no smash you hear at the other end. So I thought, oh, I remember I even contacted David Lifton. He said, "Oh, you're quit picking on that poor old lady. She doesn't know anything." And I said, okay, whatever. But I wasn't trying to be a jerk. I just was trying to talk to somebody, about the case, basically. And so I called her back 2 weeks later, and she picked up the phone, and we talked longer. She was less hostile, though still not happy to talk to me. But once again, she lied about absolutely everything. I said, did you give, did you get photographs of bullet wounds that you then superimposed over the autopsy photograph? She really got mad when I said that. She said, absolutely not a chance. So when I was in Pittsburgh in 2003, I asked Baden that question. I said, did you give Ida photographs of bullet wounds that were in, the skin of human beings that are obviously now dead? And he didn't hesitate. He said, absolutely, I did. I said, I thought he was going to deny it. He said, no, of course. I said, well, why on earth would you do that? He says, because I wanted the public to see where the wound really was. I said, well, if there's a wound there, can't the wound speak for itself? He goes, well, it could, but I just wanted, basically he said, I just wanted there to be no mistake that here was a wound. It was in the cowlick area. I said, but does it look like a bullet wound? It looks like a dried blood droplet more than anything. He said, no, it's a bullet wound. And so if you're asking me, did I ask Ida to enhance it? I'm telling you, yes, I asked Ida to enhance it. I said, well, that would explain things, because when I got all the documents with her name on from the National Archives, there are documents that you are writing to Ida saying, Ida, you can do better. Ida needs to get pictures of bullet wounds, all kinds of things. And to Baden's credit, he absolutely affirmed every single thing that I asked him. He said, absolutely, that's what we did. But if you do that, if you're enhancing wounds on autopsy pictures of John Kennedy, then once again, you're dealing with fake evidence. How do you debate fake evidence? So yeah, the thing with Ida was really, really creepy. She told me that she was under surveillance when she was traced. She said, I copied and traced, and there was always a guard there when I was looking at the originals, but eventually they made copies for me and I took them home and did all the detail work, is what she said. So, the whole Ida Doc thing is just beyond ridiculous. I mean, a part of me feels sorry for her, because what is she going to say? No, I'm not going to do this. I don't know that I would have said no, to be honest with you. But what that means is now you're looking at evidence that isn't real evidence anymore. You've doctored the evidence. And you've been told to doctor the evidence by the person who was the head of the forensic pathology committee. So now you have conspiracy to kill him, another conspiracy to cover it up.
And she was paid quite handsomely, wasn't she, for this?
I think it was like $70,000, $80,000 in 1978. I mean, I had receipts of, if she had a ham sandwich, I had the receipt, everything. And then we're only talking a very short amount of time that she worked there, just a few months. She did tell me at one point that she thought that the work was not very fun and quite tedious. And I thought, well, but that's what you do for a living. I have one of her books, medical illustrated books that she did. She's quite good. But yeah, the whole thing was was really bizarre. And of course, as you know, Neil, that's the controversy to this day, is it not? I mean, when you look at the autopsy photographs, which ones are fake, which ones are not? You know, when you look at the back of the head photograph, you know, it's one of those things. You look at the back of the head photograph, especially if you see a color one, it just doesn't look right. Like, why is Kennedy's head just sopping wet up here, but then in the back is dry as a bone? You know, there may be a logical explanation for that, but just at the very it just looks odd. There's no way when you look at the back of the head photograph and the doc's photograph, I'm sorry, those wounds do not look alike. It is very enhanced when Doc's got done with it, and that's what she was told to do. She's very good, so okay. But when Wecht and Baden were in Washington, D.C., I think it was 1996, 97 or something like, maybe 95. It was in the early mid 90s, and there was a medical panel, and not only was Wecht there, but Baden was there, and Gary Aguilar was there. And this whole thing comes up about, that's when they talked about they were in agreement on the 11-degree thing. I know that's not what we're talking about right now, but that's where all that information comes from. It was never put in a book. I got that off of video, and then I did confirm it with them later on in person. So, but in any event, yeah, the doc story is troubling to say the least. You know.
Well, I mean, basically, Baden, at the end of the day, he concluded that the wound was 4 inches too low. The autopsy report. Wound.
Absolutely.
So there's a massive disconnect there.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's like saying, okay, here's a skull. The wound was here, but now it's up here. I heard Gary Aguilar one time compare that to a football field. That means the original was on the 5-yard line, but the new wound, according to the HSCA, is on the 5-yard at the other end of the football field. I mean, it's that much of a difference. And I would assume that any medical doctor can read a metric ruler, for goodness sakes. How you could be that far wrong is just preposterous, you know. And to me, that's one of the most troubling things, is how on earth, you know, I mean, it was pretty obvious, slightly to the right of midline and 2.5 centimeters above the external occipital protuberance. That's what the Warren Commission has said from day one. And yet, when you look at the back of the head photographs, I don't see a wound anywhere down there. None. So maybe, why did they raise the head wound to where they did in the cowlick area? Because there's this massive wound on the right side of Kennedy's, you know, temporal part of his skull, and you need to have a wound up there. Otherwise, you can't explain why it popped out over there. I don't know what they were thinking, but for whatever reason they did it. And it's at the very least, it's at least mildly sinister to manipulate the evidence on purpose like that. And there's no back of the head wound that you see, even though there's like 40 doctors and nurses say there was I remember I talked to Crenshaw back in 1998 when I was in Dallas, and I said, "You saw the back of the head wound, right?" He says, "Yeah." He said, "I could have stuck my fist in the back of John Kennedy's head. That wound was so big." He said, "After they were done pronouncing dead, I went back in a second time because I never wanted to forget what that wound looked like." And Crenshaw emphatically said, obviously it hadn't changed since the first time I seen it, and I could have put my fist into that hole in the back of Kennedy's head. But you don't see that on any of the autopsy photographs. So something isn't right. Did they pull the skin back down? I don't know. That's not what I see when I look at it. But so who knows? I'm not a specialist in those areas. It just looks funny to me.
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, that you're not an alterationist, but you obviously feel very strongly that this is, you know,
something isn't right.
Very, very nefarious.
Oh, absolutely.
And I mean, and in the other films, the Nix films or the Z film, you think that back of the head blowout has been masked
on the Z film?
Yeah.
No, I don't think. As I understand the Z film, I see it as pure. I don't think it's been altered at all. And okay. I know that a lot of researchers are now going into that camp to think that it was altered. I just don't, because once you do that, what can we talk about that? You know, and that's my problem, because I don't understand how we can discuss altered evidence very well. So I don't know.
Okay, well, look, I've got other stuff to talk about.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Tim, did you go back to Blakey after you talked to Ida and see what his knowledge was of that type of activity going on?
Yes, I did. And he pretty much confirmed everything that she said, and he thought the whole thing was justified. And I'll tell you something. Here was the creepy moment of my life when it comes to the Kennedy assassination. When Baden helped out on the Clark panel, and when the Clark panel finished, they put together a pathology book, and they all worked on it. And I had a copy. I don't have it anymore. I had a copy of it at one time, and I'm looking through that pathology book one night, and all of a sudden I turned the page, and the hair stood up on my arm, because I'd looked at the back of the head wound in the Fox photograph that Ida superimposed. And it was creepy, because as I turned the page, I thought, oh my God, there's the wound. So I knew exactly what picture they gave her to superimpose that wound in the colic area of John Kennedy's head. And when I talked to Blakey said that absolutely that's what they did. And I said, again, why? And he said the exact same thing that Baden did. They did it because they wanted people who may not be experts in the field to make sure they knew exactly where that wound was. And that wound was 4 inches higher than where Humes had put it. When you watch Humes on video, and I was very lucky, because there's a place out of Canada back in the 90s, I used to order all kinds of stuff on the Kennedy assassination. The first thing I ordered was they had a complete audio collection of every HSCA public testimony. So I got that. And then they had, I think, about a third of the HSC testimony on video. And one of the ones they had on video that I got was Dr. Humes. And when they said to Humes, well, you know, the forensic pathology panel places the wound 4 inches higher than you did, about 10 centimeters. And Hume, you can tell he's troubled by it, and says something to the effect of, yes, I would have trouble with that. I'm thinking, you think? But yeah, Nancy, to answer your question, Blakey supported it 100%. He thought it was perfectly just. He didn't think there was anything nefarious or odd about doing that at all. He said that was the choice that Baden made, and I supported that choice. Okay.
I remember that Canada place well.
Yeah.
That's where I got my first Z film.
Oh, really? Yeah, I think it's called Collectors Archives or something like
right. that. Right. Yeah, in Beaconsville, Canada.
That's exactly where it was. And they had some good stuff.
Tim, you made those recordings available to me many months ago. I haven't had a chance to look at them. Can we distribute that to the group?
Absolutely. Yeah, either through you, or you can contact me.
Yeah.
I actually have disc copies, so if you don't, and I don't have very many, but I'll put them out there until I run out. But so if someone wants the video and the audio on disc, I have that as I'll send you everything that I have. So just send me your address. I'll put them in the mail for you folks.
Okay. Well, we'll probably get that into a DPUK Google Drive if
sure,
if you're happy for us.
Oh, absolutely. Do what you want with it. Do what you want with it.
I mean, on a similar note, did you have you heard any of the executive session recordings at all?
The executive sessions?
Yeah.
I think if I'm not mistaken,
I know they're around, because Chris Gallup talked to us about this.
I think some of them
last year.
Yeah, don't quote me, but I think some of them are on the Mary Farrell website. I'm almost sure that they are. But I have not. I've listened to those, but I'm sure there's a lot that I haven't listened to, because I'm not even sure how I'd get a hold of them. But you say Chris Gallup? Chris Gallup?
He was. I mean, Scott might bear me out on this. I mean, a few years ago, one of his seminars in Fort Worth, he said that he'd got copies of stuff and he was trying to clean them all up, and it did come up in a guest talk that he did for us last year. I mean, that could possibly be gold dust. I mean, someone like, I don't know how many times Fraser was interviewed, but
right,
I've heard or learned, that the audio is absolutely appalling. I don't know, Nancy, whether you've got a comment on that. Have you heard that? No. Okay.
Yes, it is very, very bad. I actually worked with a colleague who had some Hollywood contacts, in sound systems and all that type of thing, to work on that tape. He told me, my friend, that he thought it was not the problem with the tape is not that it occurred after the fact. So it wasn't at the origin. So it led me to believe that it was doctored afterwards so as not to be able to be really listenable.
Oh, interesting.
Okay. All right. Well, look, the next section that I'd like to talk about, I think we need a comfort break, drinks break, etc. Want to go through some of the specific testimonies that you're interested in. But before we close out this section and take a break, are there any other questions on some of the stances that Tim has taken, or any other comments at all?
Could I ask a question, Neil, please?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, thank you. It's more of an overarching question, Tim. Did you ever, it's sort of a two-parter, did you ever speak with Richard Sprague? And how do you feel that the inquiry might have fared, especially in the asking of awkward questions, such as about Mexico City and the CIA's involvement and so on, had Sprague remained as chief counsel?
Yeah, I never talked to Sprague, unfortunately. I talked to Tannenbaum on more than one occasion, but Sprague, no. I guess I have the feeling that a lot of people have, that if Sprague would have been able to run the show unbridled, we would be talking a whole different ballgame today, because I think he would have gone after thing, but he would have had to have total freedom to do what he wanted to do, and I don't think that was going to be allowed, and that's sad, you know, because again, now it's not a good investigation. Once again, like, come on, but yeah,
it's a great what might have been, isn't it?
It is absolutely a great what might have been.
Yeah, thanks for that, Tim.
Sure.
Okay, are there any other questions at all? Right, so we're going to just take a break. I'm going to just pause the recording. If we just give ourselves a few minutes and then reconvene, please.
Sure, sounds good.
Okay, right. I've got to try and find how to pause this bloody thing on an iPhone.
I'm gonna step out for about 2 minutes. I'll be right back.
Okay. Oh, I can't do this. I'm going to have to end up editing this because it's just too finicky on an iPhone. Hang on. Right. So welcome back from the comfort breaks, etc. So Tim, I think let's just talk about some of these testimonies.
Sure.
I mean, as I went through the book, I got angrier and angrier, actually. You know, it starts off with the Connollys and the Grodens, or Robert Groden and so forth, and then we get into this horrible clutch of really shambolic stuff. I mean, my picks, and I mean, I don't know what you want to talk about, if you want to talk about all of them, but Helms, Cooper, McCloy, Marina, Witt, Jack White. I mean, yeah. What a nasty basket of testimonies. I mean, you either got nothing from them, or in White's case, I mean, he didn't even have the negatives. So I mean, it was his credentials. Yeah. His credentials were weak.
Very weak.
Witt is a circus, as we've talked about, and then you know the obfuscation and just stonewalling from these senior people.
Yep.
You know, they just don't remember anything allegedly, or just outright lie. You know, what can we just tackle some of these just to enlighten the group about these particular witnesses?
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I start with Connolly. And I got to be honest with you, the chapter on Connolly, I probably had the most fun writing that chapter as any chapter in the book. And I have here, so I'm going to pick up the book and kind of remind myself. But because I was able to use things that Connolly said to develop issues that were related to what Connolly was saying. So, for example, that's when I get into the whole thing about why I don't think that Oswald, you know, Connolly's testimony, and then finally I say in the book, all of this is moot if Oswald can't do the required shooting, because the whole thing is, that's the whole premise, that Oswald did the shooting. But as I say in the book, this guy was incredibly mechanically inept. He was fired job after job because he just did not have correct mechanical, just basic aptitude. So that's the first thing. We have to remember about the rifle. This is a rifle that was invented in 1891, and they quit manufacturing it in 1941. It was a rifle that was made to shoot volleys of bullets into crowds of people. It was not a sniper weapon, for goodness sakes. The second thing is Oswald had visual difficulties. And often especially when you look at Oswald's spelling, he couldn't, for whatever reason, he couldn't see the full field of a word. And so he would compress words together. And I give some examples of what we have him doing that in some of his actual writings. So here's a guy who couldn't see the full field of a word very often, but he could see the full field of Kennedy's head from 265 feet away. It's just absurd. So and besides, the limousine is traveling from right to left. When the FBI tested the rifle, it shot high into the right from like 15 yards away. So you're asking this gun to do it. And when would he have sighted the rifle in, for goodness sakes? That never seems to come up. There's all kinds of problems with Oswald and the rifle. And he hadn't fired a gun that we can document for 1,661 days. So, and that's why I put the testimony of Dean Andrews in here, because Dean Andrews says, I know Oswald couldn't have done it because shooting a rifle or a firearm, you have to practice a lot to keep up at a particular level. And if Oswald didn't pick up that rifle for 1,661 days, unless he's the luckiest person on planet Earth, and plus what we also forget, if you're firing at the President of the United States, unless you're just a cold, hired professional assassin, you can't tell me you're not going to be a little nervous, for goodness sakes. And so when you factor everything in that I just said, I come to the conclusion that there's just no way Oswald could have fired a rifle that day and hit what we're at. And you hear people like Joe Rogan on his YouTube channel. I've heard him on more than one occasion say, "Oh, it wasn't that difficult of a shot. In fact, that's an easy shot." To which I would say, yeah, if you're Joe Rogan and you have a modern day rifle, it probably would be an easy shot for someone of that caliber. But that's not the case here. Oswald's not Joe Rogan, and he's using an old Italian, war surplus rifle. So I kind of took the Conley testimony as a launching pad to get into that whole thing, because I thought that was important. When Sebastian Latona couldn't basically find more than a smear on the rifle, the Warren Commission was, you get the impression anyway, they were incensed. What do you mean you couldn't find a print? He goes, it's a cheap old weapon. It just doesn't hold fingerprints. So, and he went over that rifle with high magnification and couldn't find barely a smudge on that thing. So that becomes a huge problem. If that rifle can't do what the Warren Commission wants it to do, I don't care who you put in that 6th floor window, it's not going to do the job. And why that rifle? I mean, it makes no sense whatsoever to use that rifle, but they use it as a prop. And then Arlen Specter gets in, as we all know how that's going to end. So, yeah, I think the rifle is problematic on a lot of different reasons, not to mention the ordering of the rifle, which according to the Warren Commission's own records, and John Armstrong documents this on his website and in his book, is that they get the money order like within 24 hours. Well, I don't know how the mail is in Europe, but I can tell you, if I send someone a letter in the town that I live in, they're not going to get it in 24 hours in this country. But Oswald apparently sends it from Dallas to Chicago, and they have the thing within 24 hours. It's like, what? None of it makes any sense. And where he buys a money order, he doesn't even mail the money order from the post office wherein he bought it from. He walks several blocks and mails it at a different one. The whole thing is just so crazy. None of it makes any logical sense whatsoever. So yeah, the Conley chapter, that was a lot of fun to do, because there was so many things in there that just kind of naturally came out from that chapter. And so, and I think one of the big things for me, and you hear this all the time, that the back wound in Conley was oblong, meaning that it must have hit something before it hit Conley. That's simply not true. Conley's doctor said in his testimony before the Warren Commission, I cleaned that wound up. And at the end of it, after I cleaned the wound up, it was no longer circular, but it was oblong because I cleaned the wound up. In other words, the doctor is the one who did it, not the bullet. But you hear that come up all the time. Well, it was an oblong, it was at an angle. No, originally it was not, which means that's a straight in shot, not going through Kennedy first. So that was important. And I thought the sad thing about the Conley chapter was he was there, people. He was an experienced hunter. He knew the sound of a rifle and said so. And he said before the Warren Commission and the HSCA, they were almost identical testimonies. The bullet that hit Kennedy did not hit me, period. But both the Warren Commission and the HSCA chose not to believe John Conley, even though he was the one who was hit, for goodness sake. So it was a sad chapter in that regard. We all know that testimony. I know I'm just rehashing very familiar material, but nonetheless, it's still a sad commentary that they chose not to believe him. They knew exactly what they were going to pick and choose and believe or not believe. So it's unfortunate they didn't believe Conley because I think he was telling the truth.
Mm.
Yeah, the Conley chapter was fun. I have to admit, that was a lot of fun. Yeah. So yeah, that's the Conley chapter. But as far as other witnesses, you mentioned Witt. You can't not talk about Witt. It's so ridiculous. And once again, it's sad because it turns into a farce and like a comedy skit, for goodness sake. You read Witt's testimony, he doesn't seem to know the landscape of Daley Plaza very well, even though he claims to go down there all the time on his lunch hour from the insurance company where he worked. But he doesn't seem to understand where anything is. He mislabels things. And then his behavior afterwards, I'm sorry. When he gets back, they question him. He says, I didn't even realize that Kennedy had been shot till I got back to the office. What? You didn't know he'd been shot? You were closer to him than anybody unless you were in the car that day when he was shot. I mean, Helen Keller could have seen this pretty plainly. I'm not sure why you're missing it, Louis Stephen Witt. So that raised the question, is that even Louis Stephen Witt who's there? I mean, there's no real hard evidence. He kind of looks like the guy in the picture, but you can say that about a lot of different things. And his behavior afterwards.
They didn't ask him to bring any contemporaneous photographs, did they? That might have helped.
I know someone who went to Witt's house to get a photograph of what he looked like in 1963, and Witt pulled a gun on it and said, "Get off my property." So that would have been the thing the government should have done. Let's get a picture of Witt, what he looked like in 1963, compare it to the Rickerby photograph, which is the one they use, and put it in every newspaper in this country saying, if anybody knows this guy, let us know. And that led to someone saying, hey, that looks like Louis Stephen Witt. Convenient, I guess. I don't know. But Witt is a buffoon. He doesn't know what's going on, unfortunately. And again, I don't mean to be uncharitable, but this guy does not have a clue of the topography or the landscape of Daley Plaza. And then after the assassination and after his ridiculous theory as to why he had an umbrella with him that day, even though it was 68 degrees and sunny out by that point when Kennedy's motorcade comes through. But Witt seems to think he needs an umbrella. Well, why'd you have an umbrella, Mr. Witt? Well, I wanted to send Kennedy a message because, Neville Chamberlain, he used to carry an umbrella wherever he went, and he was kind of a Nazi sympathizer. And we kind of know that Kennedy's father may have been a Nazi sympathizer. So here's what I'll do. I'll go down to Daley Plaza. I'll put an umbrella up so Kennedy gets the impression that I think he's a Nazi sympathizer or razzing him because his dad was. Are you out of your ever-loving mind? You mean to tell me Kennedy's going to look at that umbrella and go, oh, man, my dad did it again. Guess he was a Nazi sympathizer. I mean, it's just beyond ridiculous. But that's what, that's the explanation for the umbrella. And then as you said early on, Witt claims to have umbrellas everywhere. He's got them in his trunk. He's got them in his closet. They're in his garage. And as I say in the book, this guy had more umbrellas than the Penguin, for God's sakes. I mean, what is going on with the umbrella fetish, Witt? And, then they bring in Cynthia Cooper. And by the way, he happens to have that same umbrella in 1978, 15 years later. It's the exact same umbrella. Whoa, Allah, here we go. And so Cynthia Cooper comes in, she opens the umbrella and it folds, over on itself like it does on a windy day sometimes when the wind gets hold of umbrella. and everyone laughs, ha ha ha. And what's his name? What was his name? It wasn't
the chairman.
Who?
The chairman of the committee. I can't remember his name.
Stokes, Louis Stokes. He says, "Well, don't point that at me." Okay, you get that's an easy laugh, but at the end of the day, it's just an absolute farce. And I know people who I respect in the assassination community. Okay, first of all, this is not going to be a shock. Two people disagree on the Kennedy assassination. That's not exactly news. I get it. But I know people who absolutely to this day believe it was Louis Stephen Witt, and that's exactly who it was. But his behavior is a little odd. You're standing there, you're looking into the car, bullets are coming in at a rapid rate. You see him hitting Kennedy, unless you're blind. And then what do? You sit down. Okay, you just sit down, and the guy you're sitting next to, he says, I don't recall saying anything to that guy. You wouldn't have said, hey, did you just see what I saw, for goodness sakes? But he sits down, calm. They get up and they just walk separate directions. You never see him again. I don't know what the explanation is.
If we assumed, Tim, that he's not part of the conspiracy ring,
sure,
and if he's the guy that turns up in 1978,
sure,
is the bottom line then he's just an idiot? He's just an imbecile.
Absolutely.
So there's nothing that, in other words, we're not going down a nefarious conspiracy route.
No,
guy's just a complete idiot. You know,
yes,
he's got no spatial awareness. Because he talks about in his testimony running down the hill or moving down the hill to, I think, pump the umbrella up and down. And clearly the evidence on film is that he doesn't do that. And then he gets mixed. As you point out in the book, he gets mixed up between the curb and the retaining wall, and the geography is just so wacky. You know, it's just so. Is the bottom line, in your view? He is absolutely nothing to do with the assassination and just an idiot. Is that where you're coming? Is that the conclusion that you're coming to? If it's the same guy that appears in the 78 hearing?
If it's the same guy, he's an idiot, and there's no conspiratorial connection between him and anything. I would agree, absolutely. If he's not, if he's not the guy, however, then I don't know. That goes a different direction. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, Richard, you got a question on that?
How was it that he was called before the inquiry? I mean, did he present himself? Did he volunteer?
They took the Rickerby photograph, blew it up, put his picture on every major newspaper in this country, said, if anybody knows who this guy is, please come forward.
Right.
And if I'm not mistaken, it may be Penn Jones who came forward and says, it looks like a guy I know by the name of Louis Stephen Witt. Right. And that's how, and so they bring him to Washington and conveniently says, yeah, that's me. I was there that day. And guess what? 15 years later, I still have the same umbrella.
Bizarre.
So, he's either an idiot or something's weird here.
I mean, obviously, if he's in it, then it's obviously some kind of signaling mechanism.
Absolutely.
And we don't want to go down the path of a flechette into the throat.
No, God. That's just nonsense.
So he's either in it and it's an additional layer of signalling, or it's absolutely nothing to do with the assassination at all. And he's a complete imbecile and idiot, and that's it. And maybe he didn't come forward because he just didn't want his family involved. Who knows?
True.
I mean,
true. Here's what I know: Kennedy was in office for 1,037 days, and it's the only time that we can find anyone that has an open umbrella in a motorcade that he was in. And the only time it does happen is at the very moment that bullets are flying into the car. Now, it could be a coincidence. You're right. And he's just a wrong person, wrong place, wrong time. And he's just an idiot at the end of the day. That's probably my take, to be honest with you. But here's what I would say. Early on, Vincent Salandria warned us all, do not go into the weeds. Because if you get into the weeds, it's going to be a distraction. And that's exactly what the other side wants us to do, is to analyze every possible angle and trajectory. And every time I think about Vincent Salandria saying that and reading his books that say that over and over, I think, God, he's right. Boy, did we all fall prey into that. He warned us not to do that. And so what do we all do? We go into the weeds. I'm as guilty as anyone.
That's happening even now at this point with the Luna committee thing. When you look at both the meetings that they've held online, there's so much rubbish going on there in these meetings that have absolutely nothing to do with the matter at hand.
I agree.
And just pure distraction and just eating away on the time because you only have an hour, a lot of time.
They always have the one person in there who knows absolutely nothing. And they sit at the far end. If you're watching on TV, they always sit to the far right. And some of the people they brought in, I think, are probably good people. But I'm always sitting there thinking, why didn't they bring in so and so? Why don't they talk to so and so? I'm not saying the people they brought in don't know the case. Some of them do know the case quite well. But they could have brought in some people. I'm not sure why they brought in, to be honest with you. And you're right. We're back to the same thing. It's a farce.
There were people in there that I've never heard of, or never seen of, and all of a sudden we're given a prominent place in these meetings, basically just countering everything that was being said.
I agree. I can remember sitting there thinking, I know the case fairly well. Who's this guy? I've never heard of these people before.
Yeah.
So
Can I just make a comment about WIT?
Sure.
Hi Tim, thanks for doing this session. I'm a new member, so go easy on me. But in the case of WIT, I've seen people suggest that he's a CIA plant.
Right.
And the idea is that he's there to try and settle the point about the umbrella man. But of course, what's actually happened is it's only raised the profile of his behaviour. So it's pretty common method of disguise for people to act stupid. So the public just says, "Oh, he's just stupid," but actually underneath it, there was a reason. What the reason was, who knows really, but because of the way it turned out. And the other comments I seen a few years back was that the umbrella wasn't the one on the day, even though he claimed it was, because it had one less spline in it. You know,
I know people who claim to have counted the spokes, and they said it can't be the same one. I've heard that. Yeah.
So do we think it's a possibility? Because the CIA got people everywhere, literally. I mean, it's part of Alan Dulles' strategy.
Certainly a possibility. Sure.
Pardon?
I think the sad thing about WIT is once you get someone testifying before Congress and it turns into a laughable moment, then at that point nobody is taking anything seriously at that point. And to me, there's just not very many times if you're testifying before Congress that you should be cracking jokes, because this isn't funny. But that's I've seen that a few times in the Luna hearings, and it happened with WIT. I asked, as a quick sidebar, I asked Blakey why you didn't bring in the star witness of the Warren Commission, why you didn't why didn't you bring in Howard Brennan? And Blakey's response was, Brennan would have been the worst witness possible for him to call. He had no faith or trust in Howard Brennan, but for good reason, because
but pretty much the deal was that Sprague got kicked out because he was likely to run a decent investigation, and he put Blakey in as their man.
Sure, yeah, you're absolutely right.
So there's no real point in asking anything about what happened in that investigation, because it's just a bogus PR stunt, of which there are endless in this case.
I mean, I would say this: if there is a silver lining in the HSCA, it's when Blakey called all of the critics, not all, but a lot of the critics, like Josiah Thompson, Sylvia Marr, he called them in for a 2-day conference, and they could say to him, look into anything that they thought Blakey should be looking into. I don't think he was expecting, because I've talked to people who were there, and the one thing they said, Blakey was not expecting us to bring up the acoustics thing with Mary Farrell, and they said the look on his face was, oh crap, now what am I going to do? Because he knew his hands were tied, had to do something, and what it led. But even then, they're going to slither out of it by saying, okay, there was a 4th shot, probable conspiracy, but guess what? The shot from the grassy hole, no, it didn't hit anything. They missed. Okay. So what was the point?
Yeah. Thanks, Tim.
But yeah, but Blakey was not expecting the acoustics to rear its head, I can tell you. So.
Do you want to touch on Marina's testimony, which, you know, as we know, is extremely frustrating, but
Oh my gosh.
I mean, perhaps set the scene. What's her frame of mind in 1978? She's not an American citizen at this point. I don't think it happens until 89.
Yes, late 80s, early 90s. Right.
Yeah, what's your, you know, and by that time, you know, she's sort of said publicly that she doesn't think Oswald was the sole assassin. Well,
right.
I mean, it's a horrible testimony to read.
Horrible. It was painful and tedious to go through, because every time they would occasionally ask her a good question.
Yeah.
I don't know. I can't remember. It was the most frustrating of any testimony in the book, because at the end of the day, like you said, she didn't say anything. I mean, really nothing. When I think of Marina, I think Marina's going to say, when you look at what Marina says at almost any point, the answer is, who is the most recent person she has talked with? She seems to parrot the most recent person that she talks with, whether it's David Lifton or whoever it is, and they tell her certain things. Or that famous interview, she's sitting there with what's his name, Larry Howard, and I think who's the news guy? What is his name? It's not.
Press journalist.
Yeah, it's. I think it was from NBC. He's interviewing.
Hugh Ainsworth? Was it Ainsworth?
No, it wasn't. It Brokaw. Tom Brokaw.
Tom Brokaw.
And he's on there talking to Marina and Larry Howard, and Larry Howard throws a hissy fit and storms off the set. And then Marina, if you've talked to Marina is a kind of a savvy gal, and I mean she's gone through a lot, so she's not going to back down. She went toe to toe with Brokaw, and actually did not do a bad job. But you always get the impression whatever Marina is saying, it's who has she talked to most recently, and that's what she's saying. And that may be because she probably doesn't sit down and read assassination books and documents from the National Archives like a lot of us do. So she has to depend on what other people tell her, I guess. I don't know. And Marina will go to her grave with a whole lot of information that she could have shared that probably would have been beneficial, but didn't, would be my guess. I'm honestly not sure that I blame her. There's a part of me that does kind of feel sorry for her. I mean, can you imagine living in the city of Dallas or outside the city of Dallas, and your last name is Oswald? That can't be very interesting, especially if you have two little girls. And then she marries Ken Porter, and they got divorced, by the way, like within a year or two of getting married, and they've been living together ever since, but they never got remarried. The Annenberg Foundation donated a huge piece of property and a farm to them, I think outside the city of Dallas, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I think it's around the Rowlett area, if I remember. But
yeah,
a couple of things that struck me from the Marina chapter was the Oswald's proficiency in Russian.
Yes,
you mentioned that she said that when they met at that dance, he had very good Russian, spoken Russian, but with an accent.
Yeah, according to her.
And I think it's maybe, I don't know whether it's her testimony or whether it was your notation or highlight that his written Russian was really good, and the disconnect between his written Russian and his written English.
Oh, it's day and night,
which is dreadful. Yeah,
day and night. His Russian.
What do you make of all of that? I mean, do we?
Well,
do we want to go down into a two Oswalds route there, or?
Well, here's the thing. Here's what I would say. Oswald's English. Someone says, did Oswald know Russian? As Russian, Oswald didn't know English very well. Are you kidding me? This guy's written English is like that of a fourth grader. I'm not kidding. It is horrible. His misspelling words, crunching them together. His Russian is perfect. I've had people who were fluent, born in Russia people look at Oswald's Russian and they said, this is absolutely flawless. But his English is the opposite side of that. So the odd thing is, I don't know, even though I hear people say that it was recorded at some point, I can't think of any record. I've never heard Oswald speak Russian in my entire life. So I'm not saying he didn't know some Russian. He would have had to know some to navigate, unless, like you say, Neil, unless you go into the two Oswald theory, Oswald would have had to know some Russian, for goodness sakes, just to navigate the landscape, I would think. And Marina said that he did speak a little bit of Russian. So for me to say he didn't know any Russian just because his English is so bad, that doesn't seem, but his Russian is too good. There's a document, I think it was Titovitz, who sends Marina a letter after they get back to the States. And on one side, in fact, I think it's Warren Commission document 1, where he writes to Marina in Russian, but then you flip it over and he's writing to Oswald in English. Well, if Oswald knows Russian, why can't they both have the same letter? But they don't. One's in English for Oswald and Russian for Marina. So I don't know what the answer to that is, except it is a little odd. So I don't know. The Russian thing with Oswald is odd. I know, John Armstrong has made a big deal out of the two Oswalds, but honestly, when I read Armstrong's book, it's like, Jesus, I would do better at multivariable calculus and trying to figure this out, for goodness sakes. I mean, I just get confused. Who's Harvey? Who's Lee? I don't know what the heck's going on. I think Armstrong did some really good research, has some really good documents. My problem is not with that part of Armstrong. I just am never really sure what to make of it, to be honest with you. And I mean that literally. I don't know. I wish I did. Maybe I just haven't spent enough time, because he has a CD with his book that has all the documents on it, and his website is updated every now and then. But so I don't know. I don't know what to think of the I don't know who Harvey Lee. I don't know what's going on. I just get confused.
What I mean, Thomas Kelly, he was another shambolic interview. What's your view? What's your view on the SS Secret Service? I mean, a couple of points I noted from that chapter. He states that he didn't felt he had the right to demand a tape recorder to be produced for Oswald's interviews. I mean, that's quite remarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, that would really break the budget of the Dallas Police Department. I mean, really? That's just nonsense. I mean, I could produce one. I mean, why can't they? And, again, it's back to what you said about wit. Is it total ineptitude, or is there something nefarious going on here, or something in between? And I don't know. We get those later on. I think in the 90s, we get Will Fritz's notes, which told us nothing, by the way.
No, they did.
Huh?
They did.
They did?
Oh yeah, they did.
See, the first batch that came out, I don't know if you remember, it was like on one, almost like a piece of scrap paper, if I remember right. And I don't recall that really said a whole lot. So are you referring to something later on, Bart?
That, in conjunction with Hostie's papers, which were submitted to the archives that year, people overlooked something very, very pivotal. And that was that Oswald said where he was, outside in front. And that's in the Fritz notes, and also in the Hostie notes. He says he's outside watching the presidential parade.
Oh yeah, and I remember that being in those initial Fritz notes. But if you say they are, I'm sure they are.
There are certain things. Also, we know that the Fritz notes aren't contemporary. They were made afterwards. Because Fritz wasn't a note taker. So I investigated this chapter, the first interrogation, rather deeply.
Right.
And in that first interrogation that is being done with Oswald, his alibi is completely destroyed. And they keep him in the dark about everything. And what happens is that these notes are hidden. I mean, the Fritz notes didn't come out until the 96, I think, and also the Hostie notes. The Hostie notes are part of a set of notes that Hostie took after the first interview, right after, because he went into the other room where opposite Fritz's, where the evidence was laid out, and he took notes of that, and he used a blank block of Dallas Police affidavit papers. So because the back is blank, so he could write on that, whereas the front was pre-typed. And he used that. And on one of those sheets, there are notes of a pre-report where he basically said what Oswald had said. And that, together with the Fritz notes, is pivotal. And everybody missed it until I was lucky. I mean, they found the Fritz notes, and they never saw the correlation with the first Hosty notes, the flipbook notes. But when I found in 2019 the page in Malcolm Blunt's archives, I understood its significance immediately and realized, like, this is the second person that says that Oswald was standing outside in front of the building.
So you're saying the Fritz notes by themselves without the Hosty notes were just simply incomplete?
Yeah, the Hosty notes make it more complete about what was said. The thing is also, what's more important is that Fritz wasn't a note taker at all. And from the evidence and from the witness testimonies, they all said that Hosty was the only one taking notes while the interrogation was happening. Fritz didn't do that. The Fritz type interrogation was like what almost every other person did for an interrogation.
Right.
Back in those days, they wouldn't write anything down. You say you're the suspect, I talk to you, but behind you sits a detective. Then when we go to court, I basically give my side of the story, true or not. And then I have the other detective come in and just go, yeah, everything he said is correct. That's correct. Yeah, he said that and he said that. The accused can jump up and down as much as he'd like, but there's basically a 2 against 1 situation.
Let me ask you.
Tape recorders weren't used until the 80s officially.
Okay. Let me ask you a quick question, Bart. You always hear that Fritz was, if anybody could break a prisoner, it was Will Fritz that could do it. Bart, would you say that's true, that Will, from your research, that Fritz was what you always hear? Everyone said he was this great interrogator that could break anybody?
No. There are plenty of stories of suspects being beaten up and coerced into signing confessions. That's what, you know what? How do you get a 98% crime solve rate? Who does that? You can't even, I mean, you can get that maybe in North Korea or Russia. All right. But in a Western society, it can't be done.
Yeah.
So, and the average rate these days lingers about 50%.
Sure.
Now, if 98% was it was like, oh my gosh, this is awesome, then that method should be copied by every police force in the world.
Exactly.
Yeah, because we're basically about to solve crime. And that basically means beating everybody up and make sure they sign the confession so they go on the chair and so forth. When you read, I think it's Edmund Gray, he was an assistant district attorney in Dallas under Wade. And he basically started looking into it. And Dallas had 9 times the nation's average of miscarriages of justice.
Right.
There you go.
Wow.
Yeah. It's the whole thing was bent. All of it was bent. And all these people were basically just doing anything, tossing a gun or whatever, just to make sure that it looked perfect. And so they could close the case and the job was done and the person was either dead or in prison. Innocent or not, doesn't matter.
Yeah, that's what that whole movie, The Thin Blue Line's all about.
Yeah, well, that's another thing. Gus Rose did something that Will Fritz did by basically having a pre-made statement. There was a pre-made statement for Buell Frazier that same night as well. You know, that's the tactic. Just put it, sign this. No, I'm not going to sign that. Yeah, you are going to sign that. Because there's too many cops. They couldn't beat Frazier up.
Right.
But what happens if there's no one there?
Right. Yep. Wow. Interesting. Thanks.
All right.
Thank you, Bart. Just a couple of questions that came in from the floor. Mike directly wanted to know whether you thought Marina was in any way a sleeper agent for the KGB, which would put her in a bad position after the assassination. Any comments on that?
I think, especially early on, I think Marina would have been very easy to manipulate. I think as we know, it doesn't sound or look like she knew very much English. She's not a citizen, like you say, till the late 80s or 90s, whenever that was. And she has 2 little girls alone in the city of Dallas. That would have been a very scary situation, I would imagine. So I don't know. I don't know if she's a sleeper agent or not. I just don't know. The only thing I can tell you that I know for sure is that Marina always has known way more than she's ever revealed or ever will reveal, would be my guess. And she'll probably take it to her grave.
Which makes sense because she's trying to protect her children. I mean, that's
exactly.
That's reasonable. You did touch on the neutron activation analysis, and it's part of your book as well.
That's huge.
Scott's got a question regarding Vincent Gwynne's testimony. What you make of it, basically?
Oh, you want to know what I think of it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Gwynne. For one thing, he's a chemist. He's not a metallurgist. And so enter people like Eric Randich and Spiegelman and Tobin and Grant in the early 2000s. They looked at Gwynne's work and said, sorry, it's not true. That you cannot take the composition of a bullet and connect it to a rifle with absolute certainty. Maybe, possibly, but there's no way you can take those elements that they found.
It's junk science.
Junk science. And I mean, there was only one lab to begin with, and the FBI shut it down and said, no longer are we going to do this because we are falsely accusing people and putting people in prison, and there's no justification for it scientifically. So that notion that we've all heard how many times that, we trace that fragment to Oswald's rifle to the exclusion of all others, you can't say it anymore. It's done. And by the way, these are people who have no interest at all in the Kennedy assassination. None. And they're the ones who are saying that, not sycophants on either side. These are people who have no interest. They're just good scientists, metallurgists, not chemists, and they're saying that Gwynne was simply wrong.
Yeah. I mean, I think it was in your book that the FBI just dropped using it because they were losing too many cases when they were introducing the analysis. Yeah,
exactly.
Just going back to the clutches of witnesses that were in the room, it is really quite remarkable as you go through the book. I mean, we talked about Thomas Kelly. Well, Rowley, who's the next to take the stand,
right?
So it'd be he's in the room as well when Kelly is talking, and then you've got from McCloy were present when Ford is giving is giving evidence. Not that he was giving a great deal of evidence. I mean, that's another poor chap. That's another poor testimony. But I mean, it's just absolutely remarkable.
Yeah, it's the one thing you should never do is have 2 witnesses in the same room at the same time. And Ford walks in. The people who were there that day had to stand up when 2 people walked in, Marina Oswald and Gerald Ford. Now, I don't know what they thought they were going to do, why they did that when Marina walked in, but in any event, they did. And, Ford is, typical nonsense stuff that came out of Ford's mouth till he took his last breath, for goodness sakes. I mean, the idea that he moves the wound instead of how does he move it? Instead of back, it turns into back of the neck, because I guess he thought we needed that clarification, even though if you look at the picture and the autopsy said that the back wound on John Kennedy was 5 3/8 inches down from the mastoid process. The mastoid that's pretty easy to figure out, but Ford says no, it wasn't back, it was back of the neck. Which, by the way, I challenge anybody on the planet to look into a book on an anatomy textbook and see if you can find a phrase back of the neck. That's not in any anatomy textbook, so I don't even know what he's talking about. But we know where the wound is because I think the autopsy picture is probably pretty accurate on where that wound is on John Kennedy's back. So when someone like Ford moves it to the back of the neck, it's like, just stop. How do you get away with that? I mean, that's just not.
Well, he did it. He did it for clarity reasons, is what he said.
Yes.
I mean,
I'm so thankful that he did.
I think he did it. I think you said in the book 97. Was that so? When was that? Was that Around the ARB time, is that
Yeah,
when
ARB is 92 to 98.
Yeah.
Or to 98, something like that, yeah.
When did he when and to whom did he disclose that he moved it? It's just a point of fact.
I thought it was in an he was being interviewed by a newspaper. I thought.
Right.
That I don't know for sure, but yeah.
Okay.
But I'm glad he clarified it for us.
Yeah, indeed. What do you make of the disconnect between Sylvia Duran and ASCU? There is a chapter on ASCU.
Yeah, that's.
I mean, obviously, was it Oswald or was it not Oswald in Mexico City at the Cuban consulate? What do you make of that? What's your view?
Boy, that is a.
It's a rabbit hole.
Oh, it is. There's no question about that. That's a tough one. What they did to Sylvia Duran was about as immoral as you can get, is my take. Her description of Oswald is not the Oswald that we all know about, blonde, 5'5", whatever. I don't know who it was. That's that whole big Mexico City thing. That's a can of worms, as we all know. Was it Oswald? There's not a doubt in my mind. Well, I don't know if Oswald was in Mexico City, but it seems to me that the evidence indicates someone was impersonating Oswald in Mexico City, whether he was there or not. That's kind of my take. The one story that I've always had trouble with is a story that Oswald walked into the Russian embassy with a pistol on him, and Kostikov, he's talking to Valery Kostikov, who's the head of the assassination squad, and he slams the pistol on the table in front of Kostikov. I'm thinking, first of all, I don't know how well we're all versed in the history of the KGB, but first of all, you don't think Oswald would have been frisked before he ever sat down and did anything? Point one. Point two, he's going to slam a gun in front of Valery Kostikov. Are you out of your mind? This just
and he's going to get an appointment on a Saturday morning.
Yeah, exactly. It just to me these stories are just they're just crazy. I don't buy it for a second. My gut feeling is I don't know if Oswald was in Mexico City, but the one thing I do think I know is that whether he was there or not, someone seems to be impersonating him. And then you get, guess what? All of a sudden, the cameras weren't working that day. It's like, how many times are we going to hear that story when something like this comes up? Something wasn't working that day. Well, sure, things don't work from time to time, but come on. People claim that, that they listened to tape of Oswald when he was in Mexico City, and everyone that did said that wasn't Oswald. And then, of course, we get Commission Exhibit 237, which is the guy who supposedly is Oswald going in and out of the embassy or consulate, looks more like a football player or a rugby player than Lee Oswald, for goodness sake. So that's obviously not Oswald. So I don't know what's going on with that whole thing. There's a part Oswald disappears for a few days. Nobody seems to know where he's at. Maybe he was there. I don't know. I really, I'm kind of agnostic, I guess, when it comes to the whole Mexico City thing.
Can I ask you a question related to the HSCA interviews?
Sure.
And that's regarding, do you have a list of which interviews have been published publicly and which haven't? Because I know, for instance, that there are 2 interviews with Antonio Veciana that are somewhere up in the sky, in the air, but
right.
Not in a physical state available to be had.
The only thing I can say, Bart, is that when it came to those who testified publicly, Traficante was not recorded and Louis McWillie wasn't recorded, but we do have their testimony in the HSCA volumes. They were printed in there. As far as the other ones, like Veciana, yeah, I've never seen it. Like you say, if it's out there, I don't know where it's at, but I haven't seen it.
Okay.
There is in the appendix of the book, I talk about the whole Sylvia Odio thing, which I always have found fascinating. I find her very credible. I think there's something's going on there. What it is, again, I'm not exactly sure. I do know that I think this was in the last investigation by Fonzie. he talks about when Wesley Liebeler was interviewing Sylvia Odio, and they go up into his hotel room. Apparently he tried to put the move on Sylvia Odio. I mean, it's just disgusting. Apparently she didn't take the bait, as it were. But if anyone was going to ask me who didn't give public testimony that I wish would have, one of them would be Sylvia Odio. I would have loved to have heard her testimony, and I don't know what fruit it would have bore. I really don't, but I would have liked to have heard her testimony. That would have been interesting, I think. At least,
well, she wanted to give testimony.
She did
in the end, didn't she? It's because she pleaded with Fonzie to give testimony.
Yep.
One thing I also wanted to just mention and clarify: you cite Walt Brown in the book, making a statement that his assertion was that there was no autopsy, or no body alteration. But we've got Brooks LaPlante on the call, I think, still. Him and Rick Russo did some really good work, and they presented to us. Are you aware that they discovered that there were 2 morgues in operation?
Yes.
In operation that night?
Yep.
Yeah. So I mean, this is kind of come to light possibly after the publication of your book.
It was afterwards. You're right.
So just for the record, are you more open to the idea? I mean, I'm not saying necessarily something on Air Force One. I'm just saying the possibility of some nefarious activity at Bethesda.
Right. I would not buy anything on Air Force One. I don't see that, but I would certainly at this point be open, looking more thoroughly into that evidence, which, like you say, came out after my book. Yeah, I would be open to that. Absolutely. There does seem to be some evidence that points to something going on there, to be sure. It was a teaching hospital, so there would have been brains and bodies all over the place, for goodness sake. So who knows what was going on? And I'm sure if they were ordered to do so, Humes would have done so. People, his superior, who knows? I don't. Yeah. So yeah.
Well, I mean, Hume's testimony is an embarrassment and a shame.
Oh, it's beyond embarrassing. Beyond embarrassing.
Another one we can put in that basket,
And there's a case where Humes and Boswell and Fink are all together in the same room before the Warren Commission. So they asked Humes a bunch of questions, and then they asked Boswell and Fink 10 questions. I mean, it's just ridiculous. You're right. Yeah, Humes. I mean, I wrote an article on Humes years ago. And in 1964, he says, well, the wound in the back of John Kennedy's head was slightly to the right of midline and 2.5 centimeters above the external occipital protuberance. In 1978, he tends to agree with the forensic pathology panel, somewhat reticently, but he agrees with them. Now that wound is moved up 10 centimeters or 4 inches. When he goes before the ARRB in 1996, they said, okay, Humes, in 1964, you said this. In 1978, you said this. Now it's 1996. Where was the wound? And his answer was, I don't know. I don't know. And then he writes a letter to the ARB when he gets back home saying, I'm gonna go back to my 1964 testimony. And that's where it ended. So yeah, Humes is an embarrassment.
Yeah. Well, before we open to the floor, just for one final round of questions, because we've been operating for nearly 3 hours now.
Sure.
Just in terms of my last question, I guess, is just the makeup of the witnesses. We can understand the idea of scientific based.
Sure.
I think we probably do have some problems that there were no John Q type witnesses. Ideally, what would have the makeup of the witnesses, the public witnesses, have been? Should there have been more? Should there have been more executive sessions that were public hearings? Who didn't appear in your view that really should have appeared?
I think Bill and Gail Newman, absolutely. They were as close as anybody when the bullets were going in. And I think they've been fairly consistent as far as I can remember through all these years. And I think their testimony would have been relevant to what was going on. I think maybe someone like Skinny Holland, I probably would have interviewed him. He seems to have been unrelenting and never changed his testimony from day one. And he did what everybody probably should have done. Had we been Skinny Holland that day, he's on the overpass. He goes directly where he saw the smoke, and he sees all these footprints and all these cigarettes down there. So he did as good of investigation as a citizen can do without any authority or any any something like that. So yeah, I would have probably called those witnesses. And you're right, the John Q witnesses, where are they at? They're nowhere to be found. And I mean, the best we can do is Louis Stephen Witt. That's the best we can do. Come on. There were good and decent people who I think would have given good testimony, and we never heard from them. And that's unfortunate.
You mentioned Sam Holland there. I mean, that's another point you actually make in the book is
right.
Why the hell didn't the advance car just clear out everybody on the overpass / underpass, whatever you want to call it, whether they were railway workers or not, with legitimate credentials, or whether they were pressed. I mean, I think Alkins was trying to get up there at one point. I might be wrong on that, and he was told he couldn't go there. So I mean, that is a terribly negligent. What's the point of the advanced car?
Yeah, I know.
It's a quarter of a mile in advance of the motorcade.
Right. I mean, to me, if I'm in that, if I'm driving the limousine with President Kennedy and I see all those people on the overpass, I'm thinking, oh, I've seen the movie Ben-Hur. I remember when the stuff fell from the roof of the house, and end up condemning Ben-Hur's family. Accidents happen. I don't want to see those people up there at all if I'm driving that limousine. Now, apparently, Sam Holland, was kind of in charge. He was the head guy up there, and he could tell the police, yeah, I know this guy, I don't know. He could pretty much say who was coming and going. There's nothing nefarious to that. He's just, he had a little bit of authority. He knew the police. So yeah, that no one should have been up there. I mean, no.
I mean, it's just it doesn't have to be nefarious. It's just a classic example of protocol failure again. Yeah. All right. Well, look, we're getting close here to the end. Is there any unanswered questions from the chat, or anybody'd like to make any more comments before we wind up?
Neil, could I ask Tim a quick question very quickly about the HSCA public hearings? Are they all available to view for free anywhere? I mean, obviously the written transcripts are available, but I've seen snippets of the HSCA public hearings on YouTube, but are can they all be viewed somewhere online?
No. Nope. They were all, the audio is recorded for all of them except Traficante and McWillie. As far as the audio, PBS began to record them on TV, and you could watch them live on TV. But it was after about the first week, they stopped recording. So it doesn't exist anywhere that I'm aware of, unless there's a snippet here or a snippet there. I was lucky, as you heard Nancy and I talking about that famous place in Canada called Collector's Archives. I got all the audio from them, and I think there was about a third of the video that you could get at one time, and I got all of that as well. The other 2/3 I've never seen, but I do. But if like I say, if you send me anything, or I don't know, I don't know if I sent. I know I sent Neil the audio. I don't know if I sent him the video or not. If I didn't, just send me an address or something, and I'll. I have several extra copies of the video if you want them. I'll just send them to you.
I might pop you an email if that's okay, Tim. It's just something I'm looking into just now.
Sure.
Yeah, I'll be in
Scott,
touch.
we'll get it organised into the Google Drive.
Right. Okay.
The audio recordings, and then obviously Tim's email address is freely available.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. But anybody else like anything that's been missed at all? Is there anything you want to say, Tim, that we haven't covered?
No, not that I can think of. Actually, it was a lot of fun talking to you folks today, all of you.
Likewise. And are you working on anything new? Are you considering looking at the executive session witnesses? Is that something that floats your boat?
There are a couple of things. One, I am going to see how much I can find out about the executive session. That's point one. Point two, there are 4 points in my book: neutron activation analysis, acoustical analysis, the work of Keith Fitzgerald, and the work of David Wimp. And I'm considering taking those 4 points and developing them much further into a book. The only other thing that I'm working on right now is the testimony or the activity, I should say, of a J.D. Wilmoth. And J.D. Wilmoth, and Michael Payne mentions him in his testimony, but apparently he visited Marina and Ruth Payne on Tuesday before the assassination on Friday. And the reason he supposedly went there was because he wanted to hear what someone's Russian sounded like who was from the Oblast of Archangel, an area in the western, I think it's in the western side of Russia. I'm not sure about that though. But anyway, the point is, it's ludicrous because J.D. Wilmoth, who was military intelligence, worked in Russia for 20 years, had a PhD in Russian, taught Russian. He would be the last person on planet Earth that would need to hear what Marina Oswald sounded like, given his credentials. It makes no sense. So the question is, why on earth was he visiting Ruth Payne and Marina Oswald on the Tuesday before the assassination? At this point, my answer is, I don't know. But there's something about that, especially if you know he's military intelligence, there's something about that just seems weird to me. And I haven't been able to make a whole lot of headway in recent years. So who knows? Maybe nothing to it.
I think it's in the very far north, that area that you're describing.
Is it?
Yeah, I think so.
On Wilmot, I think, Tim, you hit on something really important there. Because the person that supposedly connected him with going to see Marina was Frank Kristinek, who worked with Michael at Bell.
Right.
Okay. And I haven't seen anywhere where that's really been pursued. I think Frank Kristinek is still alive.
Oh.
I can't get him to talk to me.
Oh.
But he still lives in the Dallas area, but he's quite old now.
Right.
With it, and he's never really been willing to talk to people before, but dang it, he's someone it would have been good over the years to be able to connect the dots with on Michael. Because a lot of things that Michael has told us about Bell and activities there, etc., they're unverifiable. There's no other person that's been able to really shed any light on some of those inner workings at the helicopter facility.
Real quick, Nancy, do you know how do you spell Frank's last name?
Krystinik.
Thank you very much. Appreciate
and
that.
And you can find him easily on a Google search and get his address and phone number.
Okay.
And if you have any problem, just give me shoot me an email and I'll get it back to you.
I will. Thank you, Nancy.
Okay.
Okay. All right. Well, just before we wrap it up, we've got a few other events later on in the year, similar Zoom casts. Paul we've mentioned earlier on, Paul Cummings is doing his talk in October. We might have something in September, but we'll definitely be doing stuff in November, December, and going into January. Brooks, because of the audio issues at Warwickshire, we're going to do that again. It might just be me and Brooks, and then we'll just upload it. We'll have a chat to discuss that. Matt Crumpton is interested. Jeff Trudell is interested in doing something. Jeff Meek wants to do something on the witnesses that he's interviewed. And Nancy, hopefully we can get her second part of the Michael Payne Oswald parallel and relationship. So we've got quite a lot of stuff coming up towards the latter, once we get through the summer effectively. So that's the public announcement. Tim, thank you very much indeed for giving us your time today.
Thank you for having me.
Good luck with the research going forward. I hope you'll be able to get out your publication in less than 25 years this time around.
That would be nice. You're right.
Yeah.
I have a question for the group.
Yeah.
Okay. Who is considered the expert on the babushka lady now?
That's interesting.
It used to be Ian Griggs, wasn't it?
Probably he'd done more on it because he associated her with the Ruby Strippers and, and all of that and the Colony Club and stuff. But I don't accept the Beverly Oliver connectivity there.
I think he did.
And I just wonder, does anyone know where are we on that now? And is that just the community has decided that they've blessed Beverly and that's the end of it? Or
No,
is
it's
there
just
anyone we can
mute.
get to come and talk to us about it?
I think, I mean, unless you've got some great angle that you're gunning for, Nancy, I think it's just perceived to be a bit of a distraction now.
Okay.
I mean,
We
I
want the
mean,
files.
if you want pro Beverly Oliver researchers, if you want to speak to absolutely, you know, Chris Gallup and Gary Shaw, you know, are absolutely 100% confident that Beverly is Babushka Lady as we know it.
Not a chance.
Yeah. So if you want that view, that you can reach out to them. I mean, I think all the negative, all the anti-Beverly Oliver stuff was. I mean, that was done decades ago. Really, it's in all the publications, like the third decade and the DPUK Echo and so forth. You know.
Neil,
Okay,
I'd
so
heard,
nothing really new.
I don't know if anybody else, this might not be a new story, but Gary Shaw took, when he just maybe first met Beverly Oliver, and she told him that she was there on the assassination, took her down to the plaza and asked her where she was standing without giving anything away about the Babushka Lady. And she went and stood where the Babushka Lady was standing, which kind of maybe convinced him that, you know, that she was who she says she is. But then again, Charles Brem, I think, said he spoke to the Babushka Lady and thought that she was kind of middle-aged or something.
Yeah,
So
she looks
it's
middle-aged.
still,
Yeah.
so it's still a, you know, it's still a mystery, I think.
And we had
Well,
Nancy.
one of the conferences I personally talked with Beverly, and this is probably 20 years ago.
Yep.
And in my 15-minute one-on-one conversation with her, I walked away completely unconvinced that she was that person.
I agree.
I had photographs. I pointed things out to her. I talked to her about the area, people that were standing around her, and she was just all over the place with it.
Yep.
And just the physicality, looking at her, and that I can't make that connection.
Nope.
Okay. So anyway, I just wondered if anyone knew of anyone currently actively working on that.
Yeah. Well, Beverly, what angle are you coming at? In terms of this query and this research, yeah. What are you?
What my query is because I hadn't heard anything about her in a while, and
Okay.
I just wondered if there's, you know, where does it stand on that right now? I don't consider it a dead issue because you've got people that are still active in the community, like Gary and Chris, who are staunch advocates of her representing the Babushka Lady. And I just wonder what there is counter to that at this point.
And said, I wonder.
I forgot to mention. Sorry, I forgot to mention, Nancy, that a new member who came to the conference in Warwickshire, a guy called Martin Fitzgerald. He's writing a book on all of the witnesses in Dealey Plaza.
Good luck.
I know, and he's obviously reached out to a few living ones, clearly. And I suspect that if from memory, when I chatted to him before he came to the seminar, I think he's a pro Beverly Babushka Lady guy. So you know, he's been doing some very current research, and he's, you know, on the verge of publishing something. So I could perhaps connect you to him.
Neil, I think it was Martin that actually told me that, if my memory serves me right, and it was only 3 weeks ago, that Martin that told me about that Gary Shaw taking Beverly Oliver out to the plaza, etc. Kenneth Zediker, if that's a name that rings a bell with anybody, I think he's part of the Lancer group, and I've seen posts from him asking for any interviews or anything at all to do with Beverly Oliver, any kind of interviews and stuff. So he might be somebody that's worth getting in touch with, Nancy, because he seems to be working on something in relation to her.
Okay, will you send me contact information?
Yeah. It should be in the Zoom link invite, but I'll send you his. I'll put you together, Nancy.
Nancy, there is a woman by the name of Mary Haverstick, and she wrote a book called A Woman I Know, and she was going to do some type of a piece on women astronauts, and it's a fascinating read. And at the end of it, she argues that the CIA woman that she ended up investigating and becoming friends with, she's not dogmatic about it, but she says there may be a connection between her and the babushka lady. I don't know. I read the book, and it's an interesting theory. I don't know how far it can go, but I interviewed Beverly in 1998, and I was probably a little more immature in 1998 than I am now. Age does that to you, hopefully. But I told Beverly, I said, Beverly, calves are too fat. It's not you.
Yeah.
She got so mad at me. She just turned and walked away. Okay, I admit I shouldn't have said that. But I'm sorry. You look at Beverly Oliver in 1963, then you look at the babushka lady. There's no way in God's green earth it's the same person. Not even close.
I mean, all you have to do is look at the posters of her from the Colony Club, and it's not the same person.
Not the same person. Nope,
Yeah, exactly.
I agree.
I forgot to mention, Nancy, in fact, for all of you, Martin is very, very close to Dr. Tony Glover, who was the little girl in blue on the pedestal in front of the TSBD. And she is also going to do something for us as well in the next X months. So that could be very interesting. Which suggests him that you should become a member of Dealey Plants UK.
Yeah, yeah, as it happens.
As it happens, so that you can have live access to all these wonderful speakers. Okay, all right. Well, I think we'll wrap it up there. And thank you so much, Tim, for your time. This will get uploaded as and when, but it's not a massive priority because we've got quite a lot of backlog at the moment.
Sure. Well, thanks for having me, and enjoy talking to all you folks today.
All right.
Great. Thank you, Tim.
Okay.
Take care.
Thanks,
Thank
Tim.
you,
Bye, everyone.
Yes.
Thanks, everyone. Take care.
Bye.
All the best.